Hello, 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 and welcome to a special co-stream among many different amazing shows. I'm Katie Halper from The Katie Halper Show, and I'm joined by...
Crystal Ball of Breaking Points and Crystal Kyle and Friends.
Kyle Kulinski of Crystal Kyle and Friends and Secular Talk on YouTube, The Kyle Kulinski Show.
Marianne Williamson.
The one and only. Needs no introduction.
The inimitable.
Only one of us on this panel ran for president.
That's right.
That's true.
Remember that.
And we are back. We had a stream last week. People may remember. We were with Brianna Joy Gray, who, of course, would join if she could, but she's traveling for the holidays. But
we felt like the last panel was lacking a little bit of white male energy.
Yeah,
so
we wanted
Kyle
to
agreed to diversify it for us.
Yes.
Excuse me, I'm an Italian, and me and the Cuomos are POCs.
Right.
So I just like to let that be known for the record.
Okay. And any sexual harassment is automatically excused because of the blanket Italian.
And I'm going to write a book.
And as well as killing seniors, which apparently is also an Italian trait. Some of my best friends are Italian. I said this earlier today on another show I did, so I'm going to be canceled by my Italian brethren and sisters. But we had a great stream. It was for Stephen Donziger. It was to free Stephen Donziger, and it was so good that, lo and behold, the morning after our stream, we streamed on Wednesday evening. Thursday morning, what happened? Stephen Donziger is allowed to serve the rest of his sentence under home arrest, wearing an ankle monitor. Justice is not close to being done. He should not be serving any sentence. The people of Ecuador have not received a cent for Chevron, which was ordered to pay them $9.5 billion for poisoning their water, increasing their rates of cancer and birth defects. But it was a great moment. Whether or not it was directly because of our stream?
I have an update on that, Katie.
Oh.
Because Kyle and I interviewed Stephen today.
Drops
for
tomorrow.
Shameless plug, Crystal Kyle and Friends podcast.
Substack, no big deal.
And we asked him what happened, as you guys, I know you guys have talked to him about this too. And after a long explanation, the Bureau of Prisons and this process was whatever, at the end he said, you know what? I think it was you guys. Let's just go with it was the stream. We're giving you credit. Yes. So there you go. We have the official word from Stephen Donziger. It was our live stream and all of you guys watching and your comments and your support that brought him home. A long way from justice, but way better than being in federal prison.
And by the way, he's in good spirits, too.
Yeah.
He seems...
Well, obviously he has a lot to be happy about. And we're all very happy for Stephen Donziger that he is, at the very least, allowed to fulfill the rest of his term at home. But we are here tonight to talk about someone who is in bigger trouble, even than Stephen Donziger.
That's right.
And that, of course, is Julian Assange. We're here to amplify the conversation, the buzz, the energy that we do feel is building around the country. Something very terrible is happening here. And we, the people of the United States and people around the world, need to make a stand. We've put together a great list of people here tonight who are going to be explaining to you all the different facets of the case. Extremely important given the fact that the officialdom, the forces of the establishment that want to prosecute him, that have convinced the British High Court to extradite him back to the United States, are throwing at the American people an ubiquitous wave of misinformation.
That's right.
You are going to hear the truth tonight. You're going to hear a lot about what is really happening. And this is what we want you to understand. This is not just about Julian Assange. This is about each and every one of us. This is about the Constitution of the United States. A lot of people will be talking tonight about freedom of the press. A lot of people will be talking about freedom of speech. A lot of people will be talking about our right to know. But I want to make something very, very clear here because I think it's core to what's going on. Key to authoritarianism is secrecy. And no secrecy is more dangerous than military secrecy. Everybody's going to, they're going to go on and on about what a criminal he is, and great people, all of you will be talking tonight about how is he really and what did he do. But I want to talk for a moment about what he did do. What Julian Assange revealed were war crimes. What he revealed were atrocities. What he revealed were gratuitous deaths. I'll give you just an example. Almost 700 people were killed because, mainly, by the way, the mentally ill and women who unknowingly got too close to a checkpoint. There were men who were trying to drive their pregnant women to the hospital, got too close to a checkpoint. This was in 2010 that all these things were revealed. Let's be very clear here, everyone. Vietnam was a debacle. Iraq was a debacle. Afghanistan was a debacle. So when the military establishment tries to go at us with nothing to see here, guys, if anything is clear, there's a lot to see. There's a lot we should have been seeing. There's a lot we should have been paying very close attention to. And the fact that the U.S. government, rather than wanting to stand for the free press, the right of the people to know, and holding the military accountable, you have to have transparency. A military which is not held accountable, and the way that they are able to do what they do is through this completely illegitimate use of the classification system. A classified document, right? They're not supposed to be able to classify a document just by what really today
it's
it's code for we don't really want people to know.
We don't want you to know this. We messed up.
Exactly.
So top secret, classified, something. Just put it away.
So millions of documents are made classified. Journalists who would say, what's in there? They say, we can't tell you because it's classified. They're only supposed to be able to classify something if they can prove it is essential to U.S. security.
That's right. And they can't with this.
And this is a whole veil that they're putting over this. So they, and you're going to hear a lot tonight about how they're saying, oh, you're putting the troops in danger. We don't want them to put the troops in danger, but we don't want them to put the people of Afghanistan in danger, which they did, and the people of Iraq in danger, which they did,
or the
people of Vietnam in danger, which they did.
Yeah.
So you're going to hear all about that tonight, and all of these issues are extremely important.
Marianne, let me jump in here because I actually went back in preparation for doing what we're doing tonight. I went back and I watched the initial, what's called from WikiLeaks, the collateral murder video. And so just to brush everybody up on that, I mean, we would show it to you, but honestly, if we show it, you will get flagged, we'll get pulled, you know, the whole 9 yards. So what I saw was crystal clear. U.S. soldiers attacked journalists on the ground in the Middle East and killed them. Then first responders showed up to help the people who were innocent. They weren't, combatants or anything like that. When those first responders showed up, they were in a van. They got out to help the person who was lying on the ground, and then a helicopter attacked them too. And remember, none of them had any weapons. But then it actually got worse. There was a part of the video that I forgot, and I'm curious if you guys remember this. It turns out there were children in that van.
That's right.
Now, not only were there children in that van, when it was requested that the kids in the van get medical attention at the U.S. military hospital that was nearby, the U.S. military denied the request. Julian Assange's crime was getting this information from Chelsea Manning. By the way, that's an important fact, because a lot of people lie and say he hacked in and stole the information. Nonsense. He was given that information by a whistleblower, somebody with a conscience, and then he ran it because that's what a journalist does.
That's right.
That's what a reporter does. In fact, that's your only job. Truth to power. Tell us the facts. Tell me what we're doing with my money in my name. I don't want my money going towards that. I want my money going towards healthcare and college, not assassinating people, covering up. And by the way, they laughed about it as they did it.
Yeah.
So this is his crime. He ripped the mask off the face of the U.S. government and showed a decrepit, rotten empire. And for that, he's paying the ultimate penalty. And, of course, I'm bearing the lead here, the CIA was openly talking about assassinating him, and he's been tortured for the past decade.
Yeah.
The fact that this man is not already out and paid restitution is a crime against humanity.
And we're going to speak to his brother, who is here and going to be live in studio, about how Julian is doing and what is at stake in this case. And also what says it all here is, while Julian is rotting in prison and literally fighting for his life.
That's right.
He just suffered a stroke on the day of this most recent hearing. Those individuals who murdered citizens, they never faced any accountability.
Not a day behind bars.
The people who covered it up.
Right.
The Pentagon brass that covered it up, that wanted to hide all of this, that created the structures that caused so many of these war crimes and atrocities, and also the massive death and injuries that our servicemen and women have suffered, they have never faced a day of accountability. We just had another example of this in Afghanistan, where they were caught by the New York Times dead to rights with a drone strike that murdered almost an entire family. And the New York Times went back and piece by piece, and if it wasn't for them doing that on-the-ground reporting to find out what happened in this drone strike, we never would have known. But even though they did expose that it was a family that was murdered, still zero accountability. The ones they punish are the Stephen Donzigers of the world, and especially the Julian Assanges of the world.
Just this week, the Pentagon decided to hold no one accountable for that drone attack that you mentioned that the New York Times revealed was a drone attack. And I just want to read very quickly from the New York Times. They quote someone named Stephen Kwan, who's the founder and president of Nutrition and Education International, the California-based aid organization that employed Zamari Ahmadi, who was killed, the driver of a white Toyota sedan that was struck by the American drone. And he said, this decision is shocking. How can our military wrongly take the lives of 10 precious Afghan people and hold no one accountable in any way? And this is exactly the kinds of abuses that Julian Assange exposed, and this is exactly why they have to literally lock someone up, because as we see, when confronted, first they try to cover it up, first they try to lie about it, then they refuse to take any accountability, and it's stunning. And it's so sordid because, as you were saying, Crystal, the only people who are punished for these egregious acts, whether it's the CIA torturing people, whether it's what happened in collateral murder, are the whistleblowers.
That's right.
No one who has blood on their hands has anything happen to them. So who's in jail over the CIA torture program? John Kiriakou, because he exposed it, because he refused to engage in the CIA torture program and was a whistleblower. Who's in trouble over collateral murder and all the things that Assange revealed and Chelsea Manning revealed? It's none of the people who pulled the trigger, gave the orders. It's only the people who actually reveal the truth. And another thing about this case that makes it so sordid, sorry, I'm going to use that word a lot because this whole story is just so incredibly sordid and Kafkaesque, is that the Justice Department should be dropping this case. They should be embarrassed by it. Because not only do we know that the CIA discussed killing and kidnapping Assange, not only do we know that they spied on him, that they looked through his children's diapers to try to do tests on their stool to try to figure out who the parents were. We know that because a security guard actually told Stella Moris, who we're talking to today, his partner, don't come visit him anymore with the kids because we were told to go through the garbage and look at your kids' diapers, at the kids' diapers. And not only that, the star witness in the alleged hacking case against Assange is someone named Ziggy Thordarson, who's an Icelandic man who is not only a convicted sex offender and embezzler who's been diagnosed as a sociopath. That in itself is insane. That's your star witness, United States. Really, that's who you're going to build a case around. He admitted that he lied, and so where is your sense of justice, Joe Biden, Merrick Garland? That is not something you want to be hitching your campaign, your presidency to. You should be running away from it. You should be apologizing, paying reparations.
And all we're asking for, and all Julian and his family are asking for, is for the Biden administration to go back to the Obama administration policy.
That's right. Yeah.
The Obama administration, they hated Julian Assange. They spied on Julian Assange, and they wanted to criminalize him and lock him up for life. There's no doubt about that. But they looked at the law, and they said, famously, I don't know how we criminalize Julian Assange without also criminalizing the New York Times and every other publisher that's out there. All we want, and they were right about that. They were 100% right about that, which is why the stakes are so much bigger than just this one man, even though just the injustices against him would be enough. But truly, if you prosecute Julian Assange, you open Pandora's box to criminalizing journalism. And I know there will be a lot said tonight about the hypocrisy of people on both sides of the political spectrum who like him when he's good for their team and they don't like him when he's not good for their team. This is a litmus test. This is a principle. And one of the things that we wanted to do tonight is highlight a few bipartisan voices, because this is not a partisan issue. And Marianne, you're the one who said this to me. This is an American issue. It deserves an American response. And everyone who has lifted their voices in support of democracy, against authoritarianism, in support of the First Amendment and free speech, this is your issue.
Yes.
I think that's a psychological issue. I think it's difficult for a lot of Americans to have to face the fact how often we're not the good guys. We were not the good guys in these wars. You know, you were talking, Katie, about this one drone strike and these 10 people who died. What do you think's been going on here for the last 20 years in Afghanistan? And once again, the fact that Julian Assange told us things in 2010, which we have, if we had listened. And one of the reasons we didn't listen was because we didn't have the information, because of so many journalists, particularly mainstream journalists, who act as little more than stenographers. They get their information about what's going on at war war by going to a Pentagon briefing.
Yeah,
and they
totally.
write down whatever the Pentagon spokesman says.
Literally.
Right.
And we keep doing this.
And they're
we
still
keep doing this.
regurgitating
And
the
then,
2010 talking points against
and
Assange.
every time one of these debacles occur, whether it's Vietnam or Iraq or Afghanistan, their response is, oops, we probably shouldn't have done that. Well, we, the American people, need to take a stand right now because they're not going to.
Yeah,
right.
well, we have so much more to talk to you guys about. We're so excited. We're going to show an interview that I did with Nils Melzer, who couldn't join us because he is in Europe, but he really wanted to take part, so he was kind enough to talk to me before this. And Nils Melzer is an amazing person. He is the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, and he's also the author of the book, The Trial of Julian Assange. So check out what he has to say. You write in your book about how you started out not very sympathetic to Julian Assange, and I thought it would be useful for you to walk people through your evolution on that, especially for people out there who may find themselves not being very sympathetic to Julian Assange. What changed your mind?
Well, to be honest with you, when his lawyers first contacted me in December 2018 and said that his living conditions at the Ecuadorian embassy had turned inhumane, were a violation of the Anti-Torture Convention, I frankly just kind of, pushed this aside. And I had this emotional reaction thinking, oh, this is this hacker, this rapist, this, traitor. And I basically ignored the case. I remember distinctly that I had this emotional reaction, kind of negative prejudice against Assange. And so his lawyers came back about 3 months later, just before he was expelled from the embassy, and then they transmitted some evidence, some medical opinions to me and some other quite impressive evidence. And only when I actually looked at those facts, I started realizing that this doesn't add up with this whole public narrative that had been spread about him in the media for about 10 years. And I also realized that my negative emotions towards Assange, really, I didn't know where I had them from. I had never really dealt with his case before, but I was convinced that I knew everything about him. I was emotionally convinced. And that's what's so striking, because I realized that if I, as a human rights expert, I've been investigating human rights violations for 20 years. I've worked in war areas. I mean, I know some of the most terrible things people can do. And still, I basically was convinced that this narrative was true without actually knowing the facts behind the case. So as soon as I actually started looking into the case, scratching the surface and looking at the evidence, I started seeing that actually nothing of this added up. And this intrigued me. And I thought, I have to go and personally investigate this case because something's not right here. And so I went to see him once he was arrested in the British prison in Belmarsh, together with a medical team, specialists who were specialized in examining torture victims. And I started really digging into this case. And the deeper I got into this, the more dirt came out. But it was not on the side of Assange and WikiLeaks, it was on the side of the government. I myself have a government background. I used to be a security policy advisor of the Swiss government. I used to be a legal advisor of the International Committee on the Red Cross in war areas. I have a very conservative kind of international law background. And I couldn't believe how much corruption I encountered in this case. So what I want to say to people looking at this out here, if you think Assange is a traitor, he's a rapist, he's a narcissist, he's a hacker, I don't blame you, because you have been deceived. And if you think you've not been deceived, that's normal, because otherwise it wouldn't be deception, right? As soon as the deceived think they're being deceived, it's no longer deception. That's how it works. But I would encourage you to really look at those facts.
Can you talk about what major myths you think need to be debunked and what you found out that changed your mind?
I think a good starting point is asking ourselves, what is he actually being accused of? Being a rapist? Well, the Swedes themselves have dropped all allegations without, charging him, not because there was a time limit, a statute of limitations, or because he was not available for the legal system. They dropped it when he was in British prison and available to them because they didn't have enough evidence to even press charges against him. So the rapist story we can discard. The other thing about being a traitor, well, how can you be a traitor to the US if you're an Australian citizen He didn't publish his documents in the US. He didn't have a duty of non-disclosure towards the US. He wasn't employed by the US. He was an Australian journalist. There's no evidence whatsoever that he ever hacked information. He received information, just as any other journalist would, from whistleblowers. He had no obligations towards the US. And he received information that was of public interest. Let me remind you, it's information that proves war crimes, torture, all kinds of misconduct that's protected by the First Amendment in the US and by press freedom and human rights law. So that's what he's accused of if you look at the indictment, receiving and disclosing national security information that's classified. It's the first journalist in US history who's being indicted under the Espionage Act for simply publishing true information of public interest. So I ask myself, why are states spreading this type of narrative about him? And then, well, if you look at what he's done, then it starts adding up because, well, he published evidence for serious crimes by government officials. Now, normally, these government officials should be prosecuted. And we have clear evidence. I mean, it's not even disputed that this torture happened, that, you know, civilians were murdered, that journalists were murdered in collateral murder video and so on. Nobody has ever been prosecuted for that. And so that's really what this is about. That states are afraid of what WikiLeaks initiated. They created a mechanism by which whistleblowers can anonymously submit hundreds of thousands of pages of secret material through the internet. So that's different than, let's say, the Pentagon Papers in the 70s. Well, yes, that was a big leak, but that was pretty much the limit of what you could do at the time without the internet and so on. Today, with the internet, if WikiLeaks, the idea of WikiLeaks proliferates, and, you know, there's going to be 5,000 WikiLeaks, you know, 10 years from now, that's the end of the business model of governments conducting governance through secrecy. That's the end of impunity for war crimes and, you know, grave human rights violations and corruption. And I believe that's what this really is about.
That was a phenomenally interesting interview. I actually had never heard Nils tell that story before about how he was on the other side of this issue. And then he started to ask himself questions about, well, where did I get these ideas about? And as he dug into it, totally changed his mind. You might notice this is no longer Kyle Kulinski sitting here. We have swapped him out for Gabriel Shipton.
Only one man at a time.
Julian's
one great man at a time.
Julian's brother, who we are really, really fortunate to have live with us. Thank you for being here.
No, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. How is your brother? How is he doing?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, he's not doing very well at all. You know, during the appeal hearing in October, he had a mini stroke at that time. So when we were seeing him, I tuned in to it via video link from Australia, and we saw images of him in a room at Belmarsh Prison for where he joins the court by video link, and he didn't look in a good way, and you know, at that time, I didn't exactly know what was going on, but afterwards I found out that he was suffering, you know, from a mini stroke at that time. So the pressure on him, you know, over these years has just been building and building and building. And you know, to me, it is a slow motion murder before our eyes. We're seeing him be killed by this, you know, constant pressure, this, you know, this extradition that's been held over his head, you know, for years now.
Yeah.
This will be his third Christmas in Belmarsh Prison, where he's only been held there at the behest of the US DOJ. He's not convicted. He's not serving a sentence. He's just awaiting these extradition proceedings to finish. So I think, you know, we live in fear that, you know, he won't survive this. You know, that you know, just like when today, you know, last month, it's a mini stroke. Like, what is next? You know, what news are we going to hear next? You know, about our family member.
What is the most powerful thing that an individual can do to help you at this point?
Well, I've been, you know, I think there's great support around the world, for Julian. There's parliamentarians, parliamentary groups or groups of lawmakers in Germany, cross-party bipartisan groups in the UK, in Australia. There's a group of 28 lawmakers, Spain, Italy, Austria. All these sort of lawmakers are getting together to, because they are concerned about what this prosecution means to journalists and press freedoms in their country.
All over the world.
Yeah, that's right. And so I think now's an opportunity for lawmakers in the USA to join with those lawmakers overseas and, protect press freedom here. So I think individuals can, contact their representatives.
There's a little plug here, everyone. You can call 202-224-3121. That's the congressional switchboard, 202-224-3121. President Biden could drop this at any time. We don't want to just stop the extradition. They should stop the prosecution. This should go away. And so you can call your congressperson and say that that's what you want, and you want them to put pressure on President Biden.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that there is really momentum building around the world. Just this week, the Australian Deputy Prime Minister, the second person in charge, basically, in Australia, called for Julian not to be extradited.
That's big.
Yeah, so there is, this sort of international unity of lawmakers, from the right and the left. It's a bipartisan issue that are calling for this, to be dropped in the name of press freedom. So I think that there is an opportunity now for US lawmakers to join up. And
every authoritarian regime in the world now can say, well, look what the United States says.
Well, and they do use that. That's right.
And there is this rising tide of authoritarianism.
Yeah.
The president, I'm sorry, please go. Well, the president talking about how much he cares about supporting democracy around the world. This is core to democratic freedom, the right to know, free press, right to speak.
Another? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, just last week, a couple of days ago, there's a Chinese Foreign Affairs spokesperson, and he's come out and said, who are the US to lecture us on press freedom when, they've got a publisher in jail in the UK. So, increasingly this issue is being used by, these regimes around the world to hold up against the State Department when they're talking about press freedom. So it's going to be confront the State Department over and over again all around the world when they're, I guess we all saw the Democracy Summit where
what a joke.
Where they were talking about press freedoms there, and this is a way.
Same day.
Yeah.
Same day, right?
I think so. It was Human Rights. I think it was the day.
Human Rights Day and the day that they announced the extradition.
Yeah,
right?
but it's a really easy way for the administration to send a message around the world. That they're serious about press freedoms, is, drop this case.
What they're serious about is military secrecy. That's what they're serious about. As Nils was saying, it's their business model.
Also, I think that, in terms of the hypocrisy of the United States and politicians and the liberal media and people like Joe Biden, they rightly were up in arms about Trump's assault on a free press on the Fourth Estate. Now, if you only care about that when Trump is doing it, but you don't care about that when Biden's doing that, you have no principles. You're just cheapening all these traditions that you claim to care about. And, again, as you pointed out, and this is what you can tell your liberal friends, be like, Obama was a statesman. He was respected rule of law, human rights. I mean, no, that's not really true. He was respectful, and he respected norms, and he decided not to indict Julian Assange. And then Cheeto Mussolini came into presidency, and he decided to indict him, and they tortured him, and Pompeo was in on it. And now, Joe Biden, he must have not realized that he's actually siding with Donald Trump over Obama.
That's because the two parties are in lockstep when it comes to supporting the military-industrial complex.
But we got to reach some of these people. There are people out there, do the Obama thing, tell Biden to do the Obama thing if you are partisan.
Well, Gabriel, I mean, that's a good question for you, is you were saying as we were watching Nils's interview, you said this man has been incredible at convincing people and making the case and changing their minds about your brother. I mean, what arguments have you found are the most persuasive for listen, our audience is, I hope, pretty much already on board.
Yeah.
But I'm sure they have people in their family, people in their circle that necessarily aren't, because they've been fed a bunch of propaganda for years and years. What have you found to be most persuasive to break people out of that mindset?
Well, I think, we can look at all the support there is. So, there's 25 press freedom, the biggest 25 of the largest press freedom, human rights organizations, civil liberties organizations in the US that are calling on this prosecution to be dropped. So, if you're disagreeing, if you're saying that this prosecution should be pursued, you're disagreeing with all the ACLU, Human Rights Watch, Freedom of the Press Foundation, PEN, the Committee to Protect Journalists, Amnesty International.
Daniel Ellsberg.
That's right. And also all the executive editors, so the executive editors of the Wall Street Journal, of the Washington Post, of the New York Times, of the New Yorker, have all called out this prosecution as a threat to press freedom. So people who are pushing this prosecution, or people who think that it should go ahead or aren't against it, are disagreeing with all the major editors and executive editorial boards of the largest newspapers in the USA. So I think it's sort of, to me, I think that's the best way to convince people is that, look who's behind this. It's people from the left and right. It's, Tucker Carlson as well as Joe Rogan, as well as Amy Goodman. Everybody sees this case for what it is, and I think it becomes stark to people. Then they're like, well, why are those people supporting, and I'm still in this position?
That's the thing. The issue here is not how so many people are supporting Julian. Another big story is some of the people who are not supporting Julian. The quietude on the part of so many journalists who are known for their, who self-congratulate that they speak truth to power and are so notably quiet now. You were talking about Rachel Maddow earlier.
Yeah.
She came out on behalf of Assange when Trump was after him, and now she's oddly quiet.
Now that it's Biden, we haven't heard so much about it. And that's the thing, is it's not a principle if it's only works for you and it's only selective when it benefits your team.
Yeah.
Or when it's a way to cudgel someone who you don't like that's in power. And that's why I call this a real litmus test issue of whether people actually have principles, or whether they're just ultimately partisan cheerleaders here. Have you had any engagement with the Biden administration? Have they been asked any questions? What sort of, because I know you're optimistic. I mean, you can't not be, given how much you travel, given how much you advocate. I know you have optimism that, the Biden administration is ultimately going to do the right thing here and drop the prosecution. So what gives you hope that this will be resolved and Julian can come home?
Well, I guess it's all that support worldwide. It's the work that you're doing here. This all sort of, gets back to Julian, keeps him going, and also keeps us going. It's these actions, just keep us going one step at a time, one step after the other. And I think, I think there is hope. There is, the hope. I feel the momentum, and I feel hopeful that that there will be a change, and I think it can't be ignored anymore. The extradition was ordered by the High Court. They ordered the extradition, so it's been approved. Julian will be here in the USA, and it will be an issue here. So I don't think people can ignore it anymore. It has to be stopped now. It's no longer somebody else's problem, a problem for Europe or a problem for Britain. It's going to be, the biggest press freedom case in a century, or since the Pentagon Papers.
And correct me if I'm wrong. He's going to be prosecuted. His case will be just down the street here in Alexandria, in the Eastern District of Virginia.
The worst place it could possibly be.
Yeah, I mean that's right. Where all the war on terror nonsense they tried it out of that particular court.
Well, this is not right versus left. This is right versus wrong, and I think that we're facing the fact that so many of us grew up thinking, first of all, that we were always the good guys, but if there's a problem, somebody will handle it. And that was our mistake. The complacency of the American people has led to many direct consequences such as this one. And this is why we have to think of ourselves right now, each of us as citizens taking responsibility talking about it to people. You're going to hear so many great things tonight from so many great people. We're really giving you some great information. Just don't be quiet about it. And that is what builds the energy. Call your congressperson, write to the White House, refuse to shut up about it. And if somebody says, enough is enough, I've heard you, say it again. That's the only way to keep this up. Just start talking about it and refuse to shut up.
Gabriel, what do you want people to know about your brother as someone who knows him personally, because he's been the victim of such a character assassination campaign? So what can you tell us about Julian that others don't know?
Well, I mean, yeah, he's great with kids. He's a great father. Yeah, he's really good with the kids. He's got a bit of a dorky sense of humour. You know, he's my old. I mean, I sort of never thought I'd be in this position to help. You know, he was always, you know, at the top of his game, doing this great thing, changing the world, and I never saw myself in this position. He was my, you know, he's my older brother.
He's your protector.
Yeah. So, you know, that's how I know Julian. But yeah, no, he's, you know, principled, you know, amazingly intelligent. You know, he's, you know, someone I've looked up to for a very long time.
Yeah. Fierce, principled, courageous, you know, all the things that a lot of the pretenders here in D.C. and in the media pretend to be.
A large part of the propaganda has been creating this picture of him, oh, well, he's not really such a great guy, you know.
Right. Yeah. Well, and you even still hear that of like, well, you may not really like it, but we should still support him, even among some of the support, which is fine. Right. As long as you're supporting him, that's good.
Yeah,
but it's more important to have the real picture.
It dilutes, yeah, it does. It undermines the conviction and the passion with which we stand by Assange and Julian Assange, and of course we should. And it's both neither here nor there what someone's personality is, and it's also based on lies.
We hear from people who know him well.
Yeah, exactly.
Hear the truth.
That shouldn't be about Julian. I mean, you know, it's the principle that affects us all, really. Like, you know, it shouldn't be about his personality. I guess, you know, it's to a certain extent it's been made about his personality, but it isn't really about him. It's about everyone's democratic rights, whether they're in the US or you know, in the UK or Australia. You know, this affects everybody.
Right.
Yeah,
but particularly at a time of such rising authoritarianism, this is not a time when the United States should be doing the most authoritarian thing possible, prosecuting a journalist for exposing war crimes on the part of the U.S. military. We, the people, have to step in now.
Gabriel, we can't thank you enough.
So much.
No, thank you.
Thank you for coming in. Thank you so much for informing our audience here. And listen, tell us what we can do. We'll back you up every way we can.
Okay,
we'll keep talking to you.
It's our pleasure.
Great.
And now we are actually going to hear from another member of the Julian Assange family. This is going to be an interview that Marianne did with Stella Moris, who is Julian's partner and also a lawyer.
Stella met Julian in 2015 when she was working on his legal team. And in 2017, they became engaged to be married. Now they have 2 children, Gabriel and Max. I talked to her earlier today from London. I know that this must be an absolutely excruciating time for you, and your loyalty and your support of Julian is very admirable and shows a lot of character on your part, as well as obviously the love that you have for him. But you also speak very eloquently about the principles of the case, why it is so wrong that he is being persecuted, why it is such an attack on the free press, and you also give us insights into who Julian is. So tell us where you think things are now. Is there any chance with the appeal that is now being mounted? Is there any chance that he, in fact, will not be extradited? How can we as individuals help you in this case? And what are the things about Julian Assange that you want us all to know?
Well, look, the High Court ruling last week basically sets in motion Julian's extradition. It had been earlier been blocked, but it looks like the UK courts are unwilling to block this extradition. That partly comes from the UK's very weak treaty with the United States, which was negotiated after 9/11, which basically fast-tracks extraditions and doesn't really look into them. The US doesn't have to show any evidence in order to extradite a person. They just have to ask for them. And that's what's happening right now. And I think there's been some complacence in the United States where there is a stronger free speech and free press tradition, where there has been perhaps the thought that the UK courts wouldn't go along with it, that the UK courts would not extradite Julian over what is a political offense. He's being accused of publishing true information to the public, and he's being accused under the Espionage Act. It's a complete travesty, and it's what tin pot dictatorships do normally. But there is something that contextualizes everything, which is that the UK is a very close ally to the US. And what happened the other day was that the UK courts basically deferred to the bilateral relationship between the US and the UK. And they said, you're all right, all your arguments are accepted about Julian's health, and that the conditions he'd be placed under if he's placed under solitary confinement will lead to his death. But we're going to take this letter from the United States and we're going to accept it because we have a good relationship with the United States. They basically deferred to the politics, and that's essentially what this is. This is a political case, and that's why I say it's 90% politics, just 10% law, and that is why it can be turned around. That is why the American public has to make it known to the US administration that this cannot go forward. If Julian is extradited to the United States, it is a frontal attack on the US Constitution, on the First Amendment, and you have an extremely conservative National Security Court in Virginia who is going to determine this case. There is no public interest defense. Julian will be convicted under the Espionage Act for publishing true information, and there will be no First Amendment to speak of, and it will go to the Supreme Court with the new composition of the Supreme Court, and the US, the future of press freedom in the United States and freedom of speech in the United States is at stake with this case. So Julian cannot be extradited, and this has to stop now, and it has to be through the Biden administration dropping this case.
One of the main issues involved in the disinformation and the absolute lies that have been told about this case from the beginning by the establishment forces who so want to destroy him has to do with who Julian is as a man. And one of the things that's great about hearing you talk is that we get greater insight to what kind of a human being he is, particularly at a time where there's all this, well, you know, he's not such a great guy. What is it you want us to know about Julian Assange, the man?
Well, Julian is the most principled man I know. He is the most genuine person I know. He is unlike any other man I have ever met. He is the most amazing man I have ever met. And he is precisely all those things that this smear narrative would have you think he is the opposite of. That is how you smear a person. You take their greatest virtues, the things they're most admired for, and you reverse them. And so there's been such an onslaught on his character, and that's not some coincidence, and it also doesn't come out of any natural development, because it's Julian has so many because of the work he's done. He's has many powerful enemies, from the banking sector to big pharma to the private security sector, and principal among them the CIA. And the problem here is that Julian didn't just publish war crimes committed by the US military in Iraq and Afghanistan, and evidence of torture and rendition and torture in Guantanamo Bay and so on. WikiLeaks also published the biggest leak in CIA history, and it published it under the Trump administration. And it was under the Trump administration, Mike Pompeo, who then made it a priority to take down WikiLeaks and to imprison Julian. And the CIA's resources were directed at doing precisely that. it was revealed in September that Mike Pompeo asked the CIA to develop plans, options, and sketches about how to assassinate Julian. Think of it. I mean, we talk about Jamal Khashoggi, who was dismembered in the Saudi embassy, but the CIA was planning to do the same thing with Julian in London. They were planning to kidnap him, they were planning to rendition him, and they were planning to arrest him. He had political asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy, and that is an internationally recognized legal status that was stripped away from him, and through the IMF loan, I should say, essentially a bribe with which the Ecuadorian government basically sold Julian for $10 billion. And then he was arrested, and he's been in Belmarsh prison ever since. So this is not his imprisonment is not pursuing a legitimate goal. It is a political persecution, and it comes out of Mike Pompeo's vengeful attack on WikiLeaks for it having published information about the illegal activities of the CIA.
Wow.
That was very powerful. A lot of important information there for everybody. And I want to go ahead and jump right to our next guest who can speak to some of this. So we have with us now Congressman Ro Khanna. Hey, Congressman, thank you for being with us here tonight. So the Obama administration famously refused to prosecute Julian Assange because basically what their argument is if we go after him, we also have to go after the New York Times. We also have to go after the Washington Post. We also have to go after basically every established outlet because they all ran the story too, which came from Chelsea Manning, which showed war crimes in the Middle East. So talk to me about the destructive impact that a case like this would have on the First Amendment.
Kyle, I appreciate you raising this because standing up for not prosecuting Assange is not a left position. It's actually a mainstream position for anyone who cares about the Constitution or the First Amendment. It's why Obama refused to prosecute him. It's why the New York Times, the Washington Post, Human Rights Watch, and many, many mainstream organizations have said the prosecution is wrong. If you prosecute Assange for publishing information that attacks the state or that the state disagrees with, you can basically justify prosecution for anyone who publishes anything that the state has a problem with. I mean, under such an overbroad theory, you would have a problem with the Pentagon Papers. You would have a problem if someone leaked information that was sensitive and a journalist published it. So this is an attack on press. Now, unlike other speakers, I've had problems, I mean, just candidly, with things Assange has done. I've spoken about that. I don't like that he didn't redact personal information on some of the publications. I don't like some of the timing. I don't think it's relevant what you think of Assange's actions. What's relevant, in my view, is what you think of the First Amendment.
Congressman, let me ask you this, because you've obviously been in the trenches trying to influence the Biden administration on different issues, whether it's with its regard to Yemen or the Build Back Better bill. What do you think works best? Because, listen, this is all in their hands. They could end this prosecution tomorrow, and Julian could go home to his family, and this attack on the First Amendment, this particular attack on the First Amendment, would be over. So what's sort of your advice for what strategy should be pursued here that's going to put the most pressure on the Biden administration to do the right thing?
I think we have to reframe this, in my view, from a defense of Assange to a defense of the First Amendment. You know, in New York Times versus Sullivan, we don't defend the person who made the speech as moral speech. We defend the principle. In many cases of the First Amendment, that you may disagree fundamentally with the speaker, and you don't have to agree with the speaker's actions, but you should agree on the Constitution. And I think the Biden administration doesn't realize how many journalists, beyond just the people who've critiqued Yemen and other things, are horrified by what this means for the First Amendment.
Well, for those journalists, as well as some other congressmen and senators, it would be nice if they were to speak up. And that's my question to you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all the stances that you've taken for civil liberties, et cetera. I think that the oath of office that every congressman and senator takes does have to do with protecting the Constitution. And as you have said here yourself, this is core. Free speech, free press is core to the Constitution. So my question to you is, why are you the only congressman that we could get on this panel here with us tonight? What's your personal opinion of why your colleagues are being so cowardly on this issue?
Well, I had to overrule some of the folks on my team who didn't want me to come on. But I think that,
Thank you.
I think the reason is they fear that you have some clip, and then the clip says that you're affiliated with something that is going to compromise American security. And I believe we just need to lead with strength. What will compromise America's security, what will compromise our values if we start tearing down the First Amendment in this country. What makes us, to the extent that you believe we're an extraordinary nation, what makes us different from China, what makes us different from other dictatorships, is that we have a press that can criticize us. Let me just give a moment. When people used to complain that Senator Sanders got unfair treatment in the press, and I believe he did, I used to say, look, when you're running for the most important position in the world, the press is supposed to be critical. The press is supposed to question members of Congress. I've had bad articles written about me, and that's what it's supposed to. Press is supposed to do that. So to try to prosecute someone for publishing something that you find threatening is just wrong. Criticize him. Call him morally bankrupt. Call him whatever you want. Make your case, but don't put someone in behind bars for publishing something that is critical of the state.
Well, let's be very clear here. These are war crimes that he reported. These are atrocities. These were murders. These were the worst kinds of transgressions against human rights. And so, yes, the press should criticize, but they should also tell the truth. And what's important here is that Assange told the truth.
My criticisms, I grant to you that he published things that question wars that I have opposed. My criticisms of some of his actions have been, did he redact the personal information from civilians? Did he time things in ways that could have influenced the election? My point is, look, probably most of the people listening may disagree with me on that, but the broader point should be, whatever you think about Assange, everyone should agree that the prosecution of him is wrong. It's unjust just for publishing something. It's wrong under the First Amendment. And every journalist should be afraid that if they get information that is problematic for the state and they publish it, that the state may come after them. And that is chilling in this country when you've had a president call the press the enemy of the state.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Katie, go ahead.
Oh, can you just talk about this as a former law professor and why you think this is dangerous on legal grounds, what they're doing to Assange and to the First Amendment?
My view is that, look, if you actually go in and hack classified information or you commit a conspiracy to get classified information, you should be prosecuted. Anyone, whether you're a member of Congress, journalist, you actually are breaking and entering, you should be prosecuted. But if you have a rule in this country that any journalist who gets source information, even if they had nothing to do with how that source information was obtained, that anyone who publishes that source information is going to be prosecuted, you literally would have a muzzling effect on some of the greatest journalism, going from the Pentagon Papers to journalism that has questioned people in power, because you were basically telling journalists that you cannot get sourced information, that you have to figure out whether that sourced information was obtained legally or not legally. And that can't be the responsibility of someone printing it. So it is so clearly overbroad, the prosecution, in my view. It so clearly would suppress critical journalism of the state, which is why you have, not just Kyle Kulinski, Crystal Ball, and Miriam Wilson and Katie Halper against it. You have the New York Times against it. You have the Washington Post against it.
And Justin Amash and libertarians and conservatives. Yeah. That's right. And let me just say, Congressman, I find it fascinating because in the discourse you have, people love to talk about free speech and a free press in context of like woke college kids with pink hair.
Yeah.
But then when we have like the actual the issue in question, all of a sudden it doesn't seem like it gets nearly as much legs as it would.
Or when it has to do with like a mean tweet from Trump at Jim McCoskey.
Exactly.
Right.
Oh my God.
I'm not condoning, but this is a much greater
threat. This is the actual issue in question. So anyway, Congressman Ro Khanna, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Something to be said about the fact that you're in
Trailblazer.
Congress and you're actually willing to come on. I'll give credit to Ilhan Omar, who also tweeted support for Assange, and there's some others. But thank you so much for having the courage to show up here and make your position
Which is
known.
something that you do routinely, even when you don't agree with us. Which I just want to say, even when we're hard on you, we really do appreciate it.
And you can tell us how we can help you peer pressure your colleagues. You know, any blackmail material you have, let us know, you know, where their weaknesses are.
They can call us right now. We'll have them in right now.
Thank you, Congressman.
Mike Iverson.
Thank you.
I actually want to bring in a guest who might have something to say about the idea of the redactions and some of the questions that Congressman Khanna raised. Man who scarcely needs an introduction. Pulitzer Prize winning journalist Glenn Greenwald, who of course is not only a journalist but an incredible advocate for press freedom, someone who's been very principled on the issue of Julian Assange, whether it was under Obama or under Trump or now under Joe Biden.
What is this guy? I've never heard of him before. Glenn who?
An up-and-comer. You might be hearing more about him in the future. Great to see you, Glenn.
Hi, Glenn.
Hey, great to be with you guys. Congratulations, and thank you so much for doing this event, which is an incredibly important means of drawing attention to this travesty, which deserves a lot more of it, and an attempt to take this anger and convert it into activism. I'm really grateful that you've decided to do that.
Well, and people should know you helped with the planning and brainstorming, which also very grateful for. Part of what I wanted to talk to you about anyway was debunking some of the mythology around Assange. And one of the pushbacks, which Congressman Khanna actually raised in our interview with him, is this idea that he, with his revelations during the Bush era, that he put servicemen and women and potentially also civilians in Afghanistan and Iraq at risk. What is your response to that criticism? What is the veracity of that criticism?
And also that he helped Trump. That's something else he suggested.
Well, that's separate with the wiki.
That was
let's
later.
put that separately.
With that second.
Okay.
Go ahead,
But this
Glenn. Go off.
Let me know when you guys have worked out your quibbling, and I'll go ahead and answer. I listened to Congressman Khanna, and I think that a lot of times people misremember the history of events. When WikiLeaks began leaking or reporting on the Iraq and Afghanistan war logs, people have forgotten that what they did was they went to the leading news outlets in the world, including the New York Times, The Guardian, Der Spiegel in Germany, El País in Spain, Le Monde in France, and other media outlets around the world, and they worked in cooperation and partnership with those media outlets. WikiLeaks didn't publish those documents on their own, but in conjunction and collaboration with the editors of those newspapers, precisely because they had decided from the start that they wanted to redact any information that could put in jeopardy anyone's lives or could in any other way subject people to danger. So I think there was a Morning Joe segment last week that represented what a lot of people believe that's completely false, which is the idea that Julian Assange took these documents, just indiscriminately dumped them all on the internet. That's a fantasy that just didn't happen. They not only worked in conjunction with all of these newspapers, which is why the Obama administration, I heard you guys in the beginning when I got on referring to this, why the Obama administration concluded there was no way to prosecute Assange without also prosecuting these other newspapers, because they all did the same thing. Not only was that true, but WikiLeaks actually wrote a letter to the State Department saying, we would like to meet with you and show you the documents we intend to publish, so that if there are any things we're missing, any names that shouldn't be published that might expose somebody's identity, we will redact them. The State Department refused to do that, but that showed WikiLeaks' mindset that they were attempting to be extremely careful in how they were publishing. And studies from the government as well as media outlets all affirmatively and definitively debunked the claim that they put someone in danger. Everyone now admits there is nobody whose life was in danger, let alone lost, as a result of any of these publications.
Can we ask about the Trump one, too?
So what I wanted to ask you, Glenn, is I remember talking to you in about 2014, and I asked a question about Edward Snowden, and I said something, young, naive child I was. I said something along the lines of, listen, he's a whistleblower. We all know what he did. We all know he's right. We all know he has a conscience. We know he's exposing the fact that the government is violating the Constitution. You have no more Fourth Amendment protection from unreasonable search and seizure. The NSA spying on everybody, collecting all of our metadata. Why doesn't he just come home and stand trial and win? Because that would happen. And your response to me was, Well, under the Espionage Act, he can't even make the case. He can't even have the defense of this is for the public good, because that's not allowed. And I remember being floored by that. Can you explain how, number one, is that the same case with Julian Assange? And number two, what are the ramifications of that if it's true?
So the law that Julian Assange is charged with is the same one as Edward Snowden is charged with, that he faces. It's the same law that they used to prosecute Daniel Ellsberg, which is the Espionage Act of 1917. So it's a law that was enacted during the Woodrow Wilson administration, the intention of which was to criminalize dissent against people who believed that the U.S. should not have been involved in World War I, anti-war activists, and socialists and other anti-war activists were in fact imprisoned under that law. It's an incredibly repressive law. And one of the things it does is it basically creates strict liability for anyone who publishes classified information without authorization. It doesn't matter why you did it. It doesn't matter what your intentions were. It matters only that you did it. And so Daniel Ellsberg, when he leaked the Pentagon Papers, obviously when he was identified as the source, he wanted to step forward and say, just like Edward Snowden did, yes, I did this. And he wanted to go into court and look at the jury of his peers in the eyes and say, I did do this. It is a violation of the law, but I did it because it was justified, because the law, the lies that the government was disseminating to the American public were things they had a right to know. Soon as he tried to introduce that defense, the judge overruled the questioning, ruled that under the Espionage Act, there is no defense of justification. It's a strict liability crime, which means you can't even get those words out of your mouth to the jury, which is why when Democrats were saying, well, if Edward Snowden thinks that what he did was justified, why doesn't he man up, as John Kerry said, and come home and tell the jury of his peers that what he did was justified? It was a complete lie. They knew that you can't make that defense, nor can Julian Assange. He can't come to the United States and say, yes, I revealed these documents because I wanted the world to see that they were purposely slaughtering people who were coming to rescue the civilians we had just wounded, because that is not allowed. Under the law, what he did is a crime, and that's why his conviction is virtually guaranteed.
I also wanted to ask you about the other thing that we hear, the other complaint that we hear, and we heard from Representative Khanna too, a reference to the timing of the release with the election in reference to the 2016 election. Then I also want to know if you think Joe Biden's own history, being locked up in South Africa, visiting Nelson Mandela, would make him more sympathetic towards Julian Assange.
So, you know, I always find this so bizarre. Let's assume that Hillary Clinton is right, and that the reason she lost the election wasn't because she had embraced an ideology for 25 years that had destroyed the economic security of millions and millions of people in the United States called neoliberalism, and that she had endorsed trade deals that had caused the destruction of people's jobs all throughout the United States, or that she was the most unlikable candidate in modern political history. Let's pretend instead the reason she lost the election is her argument that because of what Jim Comey did and because of WikiLeaks' publications. Since when is it a crime to report accurate documents simply because they end up reflecting poorly on one of the presidential candidates? You don't think newsrooms all the time, when they have a big story, time the release of their story to make sure it gets maximum attention when people are paying attention, when they can link it to a news cycle? That's what journalists do all the time. But even if you think he's a bad journalist, who cares? That has nothing to do. No one's arguing that he should be denied a Pulitzer. The question is, should he be imprisoned? So responding that he doesn't make good journalistic choices is a complete non sequitur. And I think, you know, one of the things, Katie, that has gotten lost sometimes is, you know, I know Ro Khanna said he feels like we should remove the question of are you concerned with Julian Assange and move it into the more abstract question of, do you believe in press freedom? And of course, we should argue about that. But I also don't think we should lose sight of the human component of what is being done. Julian Assange is a human being who knowingly has risked his life in order to do the things that we all say we believe should be done, standing up to centers of power, bringing transparency to the security state. I interviewed him in 2010 before the big releases happened, and I asked him why he was willing to do the things that got him on an enemies list from the U.S. Army, and he said, because if I don't, who's going to do this? These people are engaging in horrible crimes, and the reason they get away with it is because they can hide behind secrecy. And he has now suffered an entire decade. He has a wife, he has 2 children, he has siblings, he has parents. All of whom love him, and he is now in prison not just for a decade, but indefinitely into the future. For what? For what? For doing the things that we all encourage other people to do, which is to do reporting that shows what people in power are doing. And I don't think we should lose sight of what a hideous travesty it is that his life is being destroyed, his physical and mental health are being crushed by the very people whose crimes he exposed.
And Glenn, to your point on the 2016 thing, like, the information was factually accurate. So, like, nothing else matters. Like, we got actual information on what the DNC was doing behind the scenes. It's totally accurate. So, like, I don't know why any other part of the conversation is relevant. But thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. You've been really outspoken on this issue, and you've been leading the charge, especially when it comes to, you know, free speech issues, freedom of the press. So thanks again. We appreciate it.
Yeah, everybody
thank you guys for doing this.
Everybody should go watch your hour-long takedown of Claire McCaskill and Joe Scarborough's commentary.
The hour
and
flies by. The hour flies by.
It does.
And she's
fish in a barrel.
She's of course an
parade of
MSNBC.
lies.
She's of course an MSNBC regular because she lost her election.
Totally, right. And then she tells Democrats how to win, even though she
so
lost.
that makes her yes. And Joe Scarborough, of course, is a former Republican congressman. So if you were a Republican, or especially if you were in the Bush administration or a Democratic loser, MSNBC loves you.
He's probably been consistently bad on this issue, though, in fairness to him, unlike some who, you know.
Oh, you're right.
When it's against Trump, they're there.
Right.
Anyway, Glenn,
Glenn,
thank you.
Thanks so much, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Great to see you. Bye-bye.
Great to see you, too. All right, another person we want to bring in here is someone I have a tiny bit of experience with, who you guys may also see on this very set from time to time, the one and only Sagar Enjeti, co-host of Breaking Points and also co-host of the Realignment podcast, which is both, I think, are fantastic programs that you guys should check out. Great to see you, Sagar.
Good to see you guys. It's a nice desk. You got to introduce me to the guy who introduced it.
How do you like the decorations we got going inside?
It looks beautiful. You know, you should introduce me to the guy who had the idea.
So Sagar, part of what I wanted to ask you about is, even though you aren't really part of the pro-Trump MAGA right anymore, you still have very much your finger on the pulse of the movement over there. And so talk to me about, like, the sort of overall sentiment towards Assange on the right and how it's shifted and changed over time.
Yeah, it's really weird and interesting. So it went all the way from George W. Bush, John McCain, neocon, to a slow embrace throughout Russiagate of the idea that the deep state was trying to destroy Trump. And once that became kind of embedded within the minds of some people within the right, a lot of libertarian concerns which had been pushed out in the past around the surveillance state and more kind of came to the fore. And it was like there that I saw the kernel around Snowden and Assange completely change. It was like 2018, around 2019, that I saw people like Tucker Carlson, a lot of more online figures, but I think are really like forward in terms of where people in the administration and them were thinking, began to change how they were thinking. But it's, of course, it's a huge battle because at the same time, I mean, Mike Pompeo, former CIA director, is the person who called WikiLeaks a former, you know, what does he say? It was a domestic or a foreign intelligence agency, something along that line, which is exactly the pretext through which the Justice Department gave the indictment in 2019. You know, while I was waiting, I was listening to you guys with Glenn. I actually pulled up the exact language that they issued in 2019 around this. And they said, quote, "Some say Assange is a journalist and that he should be immune from prosecution. Quote, the department takes seriously the role of journalists in our democracy. It is not and has never been the policy to target them." But then they add, but Assange was no journalist. No responsible actor would be publish the names of individuals he or she knew to be confidential human sources in a war zone, exposing them to the greatest dangers. I mean, that was the same thing that they leveled at Snowden. So there is the big divide, right? There's the old kind of neocon institutional right, which very much had the same policy towards Assange, if not more so, than the Obama administration. But I also would say that a lot of public sentiment, especially amongst the MAGA base, is almost certainly on the side of Assange. So really it was up to Trump on whether he was going to pardon him or not, and then he obviously didn't do that.
Yeah, so let me ask you about that then, because there did feel like towards the end of his administration, when he was trying to go guns blazing, so he was pissed that he lost, there was like just a little bit of hope where people were like, maybe just to put his middle finger up to all the people in the intelligence agencies who don't like him, maybe he will just sort of pardon Assange. And ultimately, Trump did what he normally does, which is cucks himself to the deep state. So, like, what do you think the dynamic is there? Why did he repeatedly cuck himself? Even on Afghanistan, like, he would always talk about, like, we're going to get out, we're going to get out, we're going to get out. But then, like, a general would come in the Oval Office and be like, no, we're not. And he's like, you're right. No, we're not. So,
Trump is
what do you make of that?
Trump is extraordinarily susceptible to whoever the last person that he just spoke to was. And here's the thing. The people who are – this is what people don't understand about the pardon process. There's like 7 steps or whatever, or maybe like 3 in the Trump White House. And for Trump to override the concerns of the institutional people, it would have to be really big. So, for example, Roger Stone, right? That's his buddy. Roger took the hit for him, was willing to go to jail. Paul Manafort, all those people who were convicted in Russiagate. There's a guy named Pat Cipollone. A lot of people may not remember him. He was the White House counsel. He was also a longtime member of FedSoc, hardcore in terms of the institutional right and his connections. He's the guy who would have had to prepare the paperwork for all this, and ultimately he's the person who won out. It's not just him. There were a lot of people like that who were around Trump. So sometimes, the Tucker monologues would amount to something, but I also don't think that the push was strong enough. So if you remember with Roger Stone and with the others, there was an entire consensus pretty much within all right-wing media and more that they should be pardoned. With Assange, it was really only Tucker. I mean, Tucker, and I think even on Snowden, there was only one. I think it was Rand Paul. Rand Paul might have been the only member of the Senate, and there were a few, Matt Gaetz and others who had said otherwise, but there wasn't enough of a push for Trump to feel like he would be pissing off the right people. And like you said, look, like Trump at the end of the day, he's a coward. Like he's willing to piss off all the right people as long as he doesn't have to deal with any pushback or consequences within his own coalition. And they, in my opinion, incorrectly convinced him that he was going to face some consequences if he did that.
Yeah.
So he was cucked by Pompeo, huh?
It's not even Pompeo. It's it's one of those things where he could mention it 6 times, but if he didn't remember to mention it 20 times and actually get the guy to come bringing his paperwork, it's not going to happen. I mean, that's ultimately how the Trump administration worked. I've tried to explain this so many times, which is that he'd be like, we should go and do this. And they're like, yeah, totally, sir. Absolutely. And he would say it again and again and again. It was only until he would freak out and order somebody in order to actually do something that it would happen. I mean, obviously, it's a massive indictment of him as a leader and also why he didn't actually manage to get very much stuff done. But people say, like, how could he say that, he had sympathy for the guy and not do anything? I mean, that's the honest answer. He just didn't care that much.
He's Assange curious. Sounds like, right?
He liked WikiLeaks when WikiLeaks was leaking on Hillary. We love WikiLeaks.
But he also said that he should be assassinated.
Right, exactly.
Which is that's so Trump.
That's classic.
That was his.
Say everything at once.
That was his administration that did the assassination and kidnapping plot.
Right, but he also did say something.
Bolton ran his foreign policy. This is the world's worst neocon on the planet.
By the way, I'm team. If we're fighting between Bolton and Trump, I've never said this before in any other context, but I'm team Trump in that fight.
Yeah, but it was Mike Pompeo who was the most dangerous.
That's right.
Yeah, it was Mike Pompeo who said that all sources themselves should be prosecuted. So all those journalists who are being so quiet right now, you should
they're on the side of Mike Pompeo.
That Mike Pompeo is not your next president.
He famously said about the CIA, we cheated, we stole, we lied.
Yeah.
And he was bragging about it. Like, this is our ethos over there.
It wasn't a condemnation of the CIA.
That's true about so many things that people used to deny, that now they just say, yeah, what of it?
It's the unmasking, the great unmasking. It's like I say sometimes that there should be a game like Trump or Chomsky who said it, because they'll say the same thing about empire or about
we got a lot of killers. You think we're so innocent?
But we're saying like we're not going to do anything with Saudi Arabia with Khashoggi because they just bought a lot of weapons from us. It's like Chomsky would say the same thing, but Chomsky would be condemning it. And Trump is just humble bragging about it.
I love this game idea. We actually have to do this, Chomsky or Trump, and just take Trump's like funniest, most honest moments.
Yeah.
They've assumed the corporate response of don't complain and don't explain.
Yeah.
There is no avowed dedication to our principles, to our laws.
Well, Sagar, the last thing I wanted to ask you is how big of an issue is this right now on the right? Because among the Democratic base, now there's a problem of it's Biden who's the bad guy. So, of course, none of them really wants to say anything about it. They've just kind of like memory hold the whole situation and all the democracy and authoritarianism and the free press. Like, that's all now in the past now that Biden's in the White House. But on the right, you have the opposite dynamic. Now on the right, you can say, look, Biden's the bad guy and you guys hate him. So has that increased this sort of energy on the right around this issue and made it more salient for the base?
You would think so, Crystal, but then they would have to have a brain and principles. And look, outside of Tucker, I don't see anybody really talking about it. And I think at the end of the day, they're willing to dunk on Biden only whenever it falls into very convenient narratives, as in inflation. That means we shouldn't spend any more money. Gas prices. They don't really have a response. They're just like, the gas price is too high. Anything in terms of the culture war. On Assange, once again, I looked, Crystal, you and I were looking whenever you were planning this. Rand Paul hasn't said a word, right? I mean, that's as close to as a libertarian within the Congress as you're being to be able to get, outside of people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz, like a Paul Gosar, others who are hardcore MAGA, as in absolute, totally declared war on the deep state and on the intelligence community. I don't see some of this bubbling up. But also, of course, look, you can't underestimate what it means for Tucker Carlson, the highest rated Fox News primetime host, in order to be talking about this. Trump still obviously watches the show every night. It's possible, if he won again, that he might do it. And look, I mean, I don't want to speculate too much.
Yeah.
But I think at the end of the day, look, what happened in the first 4 years, very likely to be exactly what happened in the next one.
Yeah. And he's the one who did the prosecution.
Just out of curiosity, has Marjorie Taylor Greene said something about this?
Has she?
No, I don't think she has. I'm not sure she has, but I'm saying if somebody were to say. So, okay, I think Matt Gaetz is the only one to actually say it. Right?
And actually, Justin Amash, by the way, too. And I just want to let everybody know, he had an invite to this, and he go city.
Wow.
No, he didn't say anything.
Howard.
Yeah, but I just want to let everybody know, Sagar, the world's greatest, maybe right-winger, we'll say. There was an invitation for Amash. There was an invitation for Amash.
Is that right?
We'll love you or hate you, Sagar. Whatever's more politically convenient.
Thanks for being our affirmative action invite, by the way.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. Enjoy the desk. You guys
enjoy the desk.
We are. I think it was Brianna last time said it made her feel powerful to sit at
There's a majesty to the desk.
At the big acrylic desk. So, Sagar, thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks, man.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And we invited Amash. I also invited Woodward and Bernstein, because why the hell not?
Okay.
Bob Woodward, call us up right now.
No response there
Bob
either.
Woodward, here's the thing. This may not be popular. It's maybe not the wisest thing to do in terms of PR, but I really think we got to swap out. I think if people are so anti-Assange, they're so bloodthirsty, what we should do is just swap out Assange, free Assange, and I'll throw another journalist in jail.
Just a straight up swap.
Yeah. So my idea is to swap Woodward.
Barney.
What about Woodward? You know why? I'm a very judicious person.
Would be pardoned very quickly.
I'm very fair.
He has a lot of friends in this
But here's
town.
why. Because he actually does have blood on his hands, right? No one's been able to point to where Assange has cost any lives.
That's a really important
But
point.
Woodward, right? Woodward sat on Trump's statements that he downplayed COVID. And that obviously had an effect, right? To the extent that people were taking Trump seriously. I'm sure that there are people who, had they known that he was intentionally downplaying the numbers and the dangers of the virus, would have behaved differently. It would have undermined a lot of his anti-mask rhetoric.
That's actually a good point, because I remember tracking, because most of these Trump books don't really move the needle at all.
Yeah.
That one you actually saw in the polls, a big drop-off when it was revealed that Trump had just been, that he knew how dangerous it was.
He was like, this thing's terrible. People are dropping like flies.
Everyone's going to die.
Like, I didn't want to
go publicly and be like, this is just like the flu. You'll be okay. Take some NyQuil, man up.
He explicitly said, this is not the flu. And then at the same time, they saw him, it's just like the flu.
Yeah.
So that actually did have
and
an
he
impact.
sat on that
like
until his book came out. So that's when he didn't want, that's something that's actionable information.
All right, Kyle, make your case for Stuart Varney.
Oh, yeah. Well, she said, swap, if you could throw any, so-called journalist in prison. That guy is just such a pompous prick. I get it, bro. You have an accent. Relax. I mean, no, his whole thing is like just giving hand jobs to the stock market all day.
All right.
Millionaires and stuff.
A journalist we do not want to throw in prison.
Jail, but I
sure.
Except Barney.
Is up next.
Don't pass go.
Yeah.
You want to
Oh,
introduce him?
yeah.
Kyle?
So do we have Chris
do.
Scott?
Yep.
Okay. So I want to introduce Chris Hedges now. He's a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, best-selling author, and activist, and longtime champion of Julian Assange. Sir, thank you for joining us, first of all. You have a brilliant piece at Sheer Post called The Execution of Julian Assange. And this quote here really says a lot. You said, "He committed empire's greatest sin. He exposed it as a criminal enterprise. He documented its lies, callous disregard for human life, rampant corruption, and innumerable war crimes. An empire always kills those who inflict deep and serious wounds." So my question for you is the whole idea, listen, we just need to make an example out of Julian Assange so that there's not another Julian Assange who exposes war crimes and people know to fall in line?
Yeah, that's what they're doing. But what the process by which it's, at this point, after almost 10 years of being incarcerated, either in the Ecuadorian embassy, that was almost 7 years, now almost 3 years in Delmarsh, that entire process has seen a physical and emotional disintegration. It's a slow motion execution. Everyone who is close to Julian, his family, his father, who I just spoke to the other day, Nils Melzer, the special rapporteur, UN rapporteur on torture, who wrote a very good book, by the way, it just came out, called The Trial of Julian Assange. And he's also a lawyer. He's an international lawyer. He just, from 2010, goes through the way the legal system has been deformed in the United States, in the UK, in Sweden, to carry out this judicial lynching against Julian. But of course, in this process, and we've seen that, by the way, in people, whether it's in Guantanamo or even in the MCC in New York. I covered the case of Fahad Hashmi. I mean, there was another guy who should have never been in jail. He was a graduate student at the London School of Economics in University of London or somewhere. Anyway, a graduate student in London. His roommate was shipping ponchos and waterproof socks to Pakistan to give to the Taliban, but they wanted him because he was a very articulate activist on the part of the Palestinians. And in his trial, they actually played they'd been monitoring, they played the speeches that he gave as a student at Brooklyn College. Well, they held him under SAM's special administrative measures for 23 months. So by the time he got in the courtroom, he was catatonic. He couldn't even follow what was going on. And of course, he went to ADX Florence. And that's what's happened to Julian. I mean, by video link, I was in London before COVID in the courtroom, but then followed the court proceedings by video link after COVID. And those court proceedings in October were quite distressing. The testimony on the part of people who carried out psychiatric exams talked about Julian hallucinating, banging his head against the wall, hitting himself with a fist, pacing frantically around his cell until he collapsed. Of course, they found a razor blade under his socks. He has made it very clear that if he is to be extradited to the United States, he will kill himself. That's not conjecture. He has told that to many people. And that was so unequivocal that Baraitsa in the initial ruling really couldn't ignore it. Now, of course, we have this diplomatic note and these assurances from the United States, which are not worth the paper they're written on, of course, have no legal validity, and have escape clauses in them, like if Julian commits any infraction. I teach in a prison. They can invent any trivial offense as an infraction. He will be subject to SAMs, and he will be, actually the four assurances they give, the last one is that he won't be held pre-trial or post-trial at ADX. Well, nobody's held pre-trial at ADX, Florence, number one. And number two, we have all sorts of other prisons that replicate the same extreme isolation. Daniel Hell is experiencing this in a control management unit in Marion, Illinois. So they don't need SAMs. Technically, they can enforce SAMs through other measures. So, the goal is to destroy him. Melzer actually has quite a powerful quote at the end of his book. He said, and as you point out, Melzer said it's an example to every other journalist. Right. Don't try this or you'll end up like this. But the legal case against Julian is so thin that I think in many ways they will just find it convenient to break him. And he is breaking both physically and psychologically. He had a stroke, as we know now, on the 27th of October, on the second, I think it was the second day of that proceeding. That's why he didn't appear. I was watching it. So we saw him on the first day, and suddenly on the second day we didn't see him. Well, we didn't see him because he had a stroke, and Stella Moris, his fiance, is talking about paralysis and memory loss and everything else. So, yeah, that's not uncommon. In the column, I draw the example of Toussaint Louverture, who led the Haitian liberation movement, the only successful slave revolt in human history. Once the French, through a subterfuge, managed to capture him, they shipped him off to France, and he died of malnutrition and tuberculosis and in an unheated cell. Well, that's exactly what they're doing to Julian. It's extreme isolation. We know what extreme isolation does. And just to throw it in, once there was a change of government in Ecuador, Lenin Moreno came to power, who danced to the tune Washington played and got a big IMF loan because of it. They made his life a living hell because they were trying to drive him out of the embassy. So aside from the judicial, the kind of Dickensian farce that this trial has become, it is accompanied by tremendous cruelty towards Julian himself.
Can you talk about the silence from your former colleagues at the New York Times? We know that a Washington Post journalist was spied on in the embassy, and yet Stefania Maurizi, who's a very brave Italian journalist, was got a FOIA, put in a FOIA request, and the very journalist who was spied on from the Washington Post didn't do anything about it, hasn't even spoken about it. Why the silence and the cowardice from everyone?
Well,
basically?
because there was always a deep animus towards WikiLeaks and towards Julian by the establishment media. It is always the alternative media, primarily the non-commercial media, that shames the press, the traditional commercial press, mainstream press, into doing their job. That has been true throughout history. So I write for Scheer Post. It's run by the great journalist Bob Scheer, who was the editor of Ramparts. Well, if you wanted to learn first about COINTELPRO, you read Ramparts, that iconic picture of a little girl in Vietnam, naked, running down a road with being burned by napalm. That was published first in Ramparts. In fact, King was reading Ramparts with Abernathy in an airport, saw the picture and pushed his food away. And Abernathy said, "Is there something wrong with the food?" He said, "There's something wrong with my food until I denounce this war." And so if you look at the early reporting in Vietnam, it was the kind of cheerleading that typifies the press. But as the war continued, they were essentially exposed for the handmaidens of power that they are. So when Julian and WikiLeaks released this material, if the mainstream press hadn't published it, it would have exposed them. And of course, what they sell, really, if you want to talk about it as a product, is credibility. So they ran it, but they didn't like Julian at all. And they didn't like WikiLeaks, which is why almost immediately after it was published, Bill Keller, the former executive editor of the Times, wrote this nasty column about Julian, how he smells and this, and that just started the whole, but they never liked him. And they didn't like him because, in a way, he and WikiLeaks exposed them. So that fits with a kind of pattern that you see within the mainstream press. They want to posit themselves as a kind of moral arbiters of society. They are not, of course, but they will viciously go after people who have the courage, like Julian, to stand up and speak inconvenient truths as part of the establishment. You go to Gary Webb. I mean, Gary Webb exposed the complicity of the CIA and with the Contras. I was actually in Central America then, so Contra C-130s and flights were going to Oakland and stuff. They were getting money, using the money to back the Contras. Well, he exposed all that. But who did the lynching? It was in the New York Times. It was in the Washington Post. And what they went for they didn't do any reporting with Webb. They went for briefings from the CIA and then wrote these long stories discrediting Webb, and he was fired, of course, then eventually committed suicide. So that's why. So the idea that there was always a deep distaste for Julian and WikiLeaks from the beginning, but the mainstream press, in order to salvage their own credibility, had to print this material. But that's why they now essentially are part of the firing squad.
You know, Chris, you were with us last week when we were talking about Stephen Donziger. And obviously, both Stephen and Julian Assange are political prisoners. And in this time of political show trials, in this time of taking political prisoners, these things that supposedly, quote unquote, don't happen here. Have you, in your reporting, you've been around for a long time, have you ever seen anything in American history that in this modern era like this, like the way that journalism is willing to, the mainstream press, willing to chop wood and carry water for government, even in the face of its malfeasance, when the government is basically willing to do whatever the military says that it wants done? Have you ever seen anything this bad? Is this really new, or is this just the same old, and we shouldn't consider it different?
It's not really new. I mean, if you look at radicals, you know, Leonard Peltier, Mumia Abu-Jamal, who are still in prison, both of them, by the way, both political prisoners, the press has always conspired, the mainstream commercial press has always conspired with the power elite to go after radicals. Remember, after King gave that speech in Riverside Church on April 4th,
they killed him.
The New York Times crucified him. Go read that story. It's appalling. Yeah. So it's not new. I think what is new is the complete disregard for the most basic elements of law, which we see in the Donziger case, which we see in Julian's case. I mean, if you follow it as I do in great detail, I'm just shocked at, you know, ruling. I mean, for instance, this particular ruling by the appellate court in the UK, this two-panel judge, well, they didn't disagree with any of the conclusions that the district court judge Baritza found, but they said it's superseded by a diplomatic note that has no legal validity. Well, that's a complete legal non sequitur. It doesn't make any sense. But they're just grasping at anything they can in order to railroad Julian into the arms of American authorities. So there's that. And then I would also say that it does, of course, set a legal precedent for the press. So I have published, been handed or obtained classified information, published this information on the front page of the New York Times. But if Julian is actually...
Oh, my gosh.
No, I think we've lost Chris.
Yeah.
I really wanted to hear the end of that sentence.
Yeah.
Okay.
Am I back? There we go. We got you back. Finish the thought.
It's not Wi-Fi, but
you said if Julian is
the deep state.
Yeah, right. So if, like, you look at Gordon Kromberg, I mean, who's kind of the Grand Inquisitor. So if Julian, there's no question that Julian would be found guilty if he was extradited. But that sets the precedent. Any journalist who has in their possession classified material, because remember, Julian was handed this material, as we all were when we published classified material. Any journalist in possession of that material has committed a criminal offense, and any publication that publishes that material has then committed a criminal offense. So when I did a big investigative piece at the Times, like any investigative reporter, my last visit was in a big conference room with the New York Times lawyers, and I had to essentially make a legal case for what was going to go in the paper. Did I have the documentation? Were there multiple sources? And that's, sadly, as all investigative reporters would tell you, there's a lot of information that we know is true that doesn't get out into the public because of that. Well, what are these lawyers going to say now? So it is a death blow to that. And remember that investigative journalism into the centers of power is already on life support because of wholesale surveillance. Obama was quite egregious in this with using the Espionage Act, Drake, Kiriakou, etc. Well, that's why Snowden had to leave the country, because if you actually give it to a journalist now, you're monitored. And so my colleagues who still do this work at the Times tell me they can't get anything.
Wow.
Yeah. The only way we get information is from people like Julian, Chelsea Manning, Snowden, Jeremy Hammond, who did hack into a private security firm and then released, I think, 5 million emails, which I then used those emails when I sued Obama over Section 1021 of the National Defense Authorization Act, which overturned the Posse Comitatus Act, which prohibited the military from being used as a domestic police force. We used those emails in the case, and we won, by the way, in the Southern District Court in New York. We lost on appeal. But we used those emails because it exposed how Homeland Security, the FBI, and private security firms were attempting to link dissident and leftist groups to terrorist groups to use terrorism laws against them. So it's a very dark moment. And I think your question is a good one. It has happened in the past. But I would say the collapse of the judicial system, remember in the past that the judiciary was strong enough that it threw out Ellsberg's case because of the illegalities that have been committed against Ellsberg, including breaking into his psychiatrist's office, etc. I'm not sure that would happen anymore. The judiciary is so anemic, and we forget that it's corporate. So you have, quote unquote, liberal justices on liberal issues, but they're all corporate lawyers. We don't have the Gator Ginsburgs anymore.
I mean, going back to last week,
the ACLU or human rights law is appointed to federal judgeships, Democrat or Republican. And just let me throw one last thing in. Biden was a huge champion of Clarence Thomas,
right,
and of the guy who just died, the other retrograde on the. What was his name?
Scalia.
Yeah.
Rehnquist,
yes,
Scalia.
Well, I mean, we see the failures of the judicial system through the case we talked to you last week about, which is Stephen Donziger. So no one should have too much faith in the independence.
And Daniel Ellsberg, who I spoke to, we're playing that later. He loved your piece, by the way.
That's right.
He made
and everybody needs to go read that for sure. Read it at your post.
And he made the point that these types of things that they did to him, which got his case thrown out, they did to Julian, but
That's
it hasn't.
Right. Yeah. All right.
Thrown out.
Chris Hedges, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Keep up the great work.
Yes.
Thank you.
I think.
Thank you so much.
I think it's really important the way this case is bringing to light the delegitimization of the classification system. I mean, everybody says, oh, he classified material, and anything they don't want us to know, they just call classified. And then if journalists say, well, what makes it classified? Well, it's classified, we can't tell you.
Right.
This is such a poison and such an important part of what's going on.
Well, just look at what's going on with the JFK file release, which they keep
pushing
off and pushing off and pushing
That's right.
Yeah.
I'm old enough to be able to tell you that there's been a sickness in this country ever since the fact that we never really learned the whole truth about the assassination of JFK has left a poison in the psychic bloodstream of this country that has never left.
I thought you were going to say you're old enough to tell us who killed JFK, but no, you don't know that.
Read the devil.
My father.
Katie, who do we have next?
Okay, so we have pre-taped interviews that I did with two people who need no introductions, Noam Chomsky and Susan Sarandon. Can you tell us why the Assange case is so important and if you were surprised by his treatment?
I'm surprised by the savagery, the gratuitous savagery of the treatment, which goes well beyond any relevant concern, if there is one, and I presume is simply intended to intimidate others, to make clear that there are few limits to the savagery with which concentrated power will protect its right to conceal crimes of state.
And why is this case so important to you and to the world?
It's important to me, first of all, and the world, simply because of the human aspect. A man is being tortured for years for having carried out the work that a serious journalist is supposed to carry out, exposing crimes of state. But it's far broader than that, because the web is spread very wide. It's intimidation of others, warning them not to pursue the course of honest inquiry, or state power will come after you with savagery.
What effect do you see this having on the media, a quote unquote free press, the First Amendment?
That depends on how they react. If they subject themselves to the intimidation, it's serious. If they join in dedicated, committed protest against these acts, they can win. The state has little capacity to enforce these rules, except the subordination of those to whom their power is directed.
And why do you think the media has remained so silent on this issue, the non-independent media?
Well, I think the answer is pretty clear. Cowardice. They used Assange's revelations. They were glad to have them. Now, if they don't stand up in defense of both him personally and the principle that was upheld by the release to the public of important information, they're failing in their elementary responsibilities.
Any final thoughts about this case, about Julian Assange's fight, his future, his fate?
We must make every effort to ensure that he's free and that the forces that are persecuting him will be terminated, blocked from pursuing this course, and brought to account.
Can you tell us why Julian Assange's case is important to you?
Oh my God. Well, it's so important because I think we've lost journalism. We've lost the ability now to find the truth, and people don't trust the information that they're getting. There's so much clickbait that's happening that doesn't, I mean, I know from my personal experience how difficult it is to undo misinformation. That's character assassination and misinformation. And once it's out there and repeated for a few years, and he's a prime example of that with, you know, all the catchwords like rapist and that he hacked and all of these things that are misleading. But the big problem, so that's a problem because people, just their relationship to information now is terrible. But the fact that you can be, that telling the truth is a crime. I mean, Daniel Ellsberg then would have been locked up, right? We need people we need journalists, we need investigative reporters to tell us about things that the government is hiding, that are illegal, inhumane, immoral acts. And, you know, when you have finally a whistleblower that comes forward with information that is really astoundingly horrifying, as Chelsea Manning did, God bless her, and then you have the publisher punished in a very, I mean, right now he's could die, you know, so it's gone on for so long and he's so fragile. And on top of that, all the other newspapers, all the mainstream newspapers benefited from this information. They printed it. No one is accusing them of endangering the troops or bringing down America or anything. They all profited. The Guardian, what else? The Washington Post. But they've singled him out because this is really to tell other journalists not to go into this kind of investigative reporting. Because if you can't ask questions, hi, Kitty, if you can't ask questions, how can you be a journalist that's going to discover anything? I mean, so what they're trying to do is upset the whole program here, is really just as in Stephen Donziger's case. Luckily, he's not been incarcerated as long. And now, thanks to people that have really made this an issue, he's back home, even though he's still under house arrest. But the same kind of thing. This is to tell you, you cannot take on corporations. You cannot take on the government. You can't, you know, we are bigger than you and you will be punished. So people become self-censoring. News sources, especially mainstream media, gets their orders from the CIA, from the government, from the White House, you know, and the same thing with the New York Times. So where are you going to go? And what's going to happen? Why would anyone take a chance again to give us information of what's being done in our name? These war crimes, you know, or when you're trying to have an election and you find out, you should know. I mean, you can track the money and you can find out that way where someone's allegiance. But when there's other things that are going on, you have the right as a citizen for information. How can you make decisions going forward of who to vote for when you're not getting that information? And we can see that there's certainly a prejudice of Flint still doesn't have its water fixed. The Amazon is still, Chevron hasn't paid what they owe there. So it's definitely taking advantage of racism and the vulnerable, the poor, those that don't have a voice. So those that do have a voice, who are connected to news sources, have and call themselves journalists, have the responsibility to find the truth. And what's the most shocking to me, not that our government is who instigated this whole thing and who obviously wants him to be in jail or dead, as we heard from the investigations of talk about assassination. But what really worries me is where all the so-called journalists, why very few people are even talking about Assange. And whatever you think of him personally as or whatever confusing information you have, if you're a journalist, you should be investigating this for your own sake in the future. And I remember when, was it Jim Acosta? Trump got upset with him and then threw him out or took away his credentials or something. Right. And everybody was in an uproar. Okay, that's true. You should probably object to that. But then this is going on for years and years and years, and you don't hear a peep. That's what really surprises me, especially from those institutions that actually aided and abetted the publishing of these things to their advantage. So what does that say? That's why I'm scared. What does that say? Why are people, we're distracted by all this little stuff that goes on. But what about your right to have information? What about your right to, as a journalist, to be able to go after an inconvenient truth? Because that's what happened here. These weren't truths that fit into the, into the description of what they wanted out there, because they were damaging. But yet the Steele dossier gets picked up and put all over the place. I'm worried about him, and I'm worried about us, and what this means for our future and our kids' future. And this is how you slide into real fascism, when you can't speak about things and when people start self-censoring themselves, especially those that we depend upon to check our government, to check our military, to give us truth so we can live and make decisions. But it's also such a great opportunity, because things are disintegrating, to get in there and actually do something. So this is Howard's End. To be hopeful in bad times is not just foolishly romantic. It is based on the fact that human history is a history not only of cruelty, but also of compassion, sacrifice, courage, kindness. What we choose to emphasize in this complex history will determine our lives. If we see only the worst, it destroys our capacity to do something. If we remember those times and places, and there are so many, where I always cry when I read this, where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us the energy to act, and at least the possibility of sending this spinning top of a world in a different direction. And if we do act in however small a way, we don't have to wait for some grand utopian future. The future is an infinite succession of presents, and to live now as we think human beings should live, in defiance of all that is bad around us, is itself a marvelous victory. I don't know why that always makes me cry. It's Howard's End.
Wow.
So,
that's
hopeful.
very moving. Wasn't that moving? And
I love her
so
amazing.
Much. I know. So,
and her line, "I'm worried about him, and I'm worried about us."
Yeah, it's perfecly.
This is about us.
Yeah. Not me, us. Which can also be said in an Australian accent.
Good day, mate. Not me, us. Oi.
Oi. Not me, us. Put another shrimp on the babby. And just a little plug that you can see the full interview that I did with Susan and Chomsky and Stella, and Nils and Cornel at youtube.com/The Katie Halper Show. I'll be posting them, and you can also, of course, subscribe so you don't miss any of that at youtube.com/The Katie Halper Show. And you can find the rest of Marianne's Stella interview at Marianne's Substack and YouTube channel.
I'm such a Susan Sarandon fangirl.
I know. Who isn't? What? There's literally something wrong with people who hate Susan Sarandon and hate Bernie Sanders. Like,
I heard she got Trump elected
people like that should be locked up. Again, more people we can swap out Julian Assange for.
There you go. There you go. All right, we wanted to bring in some voices of some of the journalists who really did the legwork of covering every aspect of, you know, the railroading of Julian Assange. Every hearing, they were there lifting up the salient issues and bringing them to their audiences and a lot more. We have Kevin Gosztola. He is a curator of the Dissenter newsletter. He's reported extensively on this case as one of the few journalists also to cover Chelsea Manning's court-martial. We also have Richard Medhurst. He's a British journalist who covers U.S. politics, the Middle East, and international affairs. He's also extensively reported on this case. Both of you guys covering the Assange hearings, both remotely and on the ground in London. So thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you all.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, of course. Richard, let me start with you. For people who didn't follow all the ins and outs of the hearings or where the legal process goes from here, could you just bring people up to date with what exactly happens now?
Yeah, so last Friday, the High Court, their decision was that, you know, it's got nothing to do with press freedoms anymore. The whole court case now is about Assange's health and these diplomatic assurances, right? So the High Court ruled last week that they accept the conclusion that Baraitser arrived to, meaning that they accept Assange is suicidal and that, you know, she applied the test correctly of Section 91 under the Extradition Act, that, you know, if he's extradited, it would be oppressive because he'd kill himself. They accepted all this about his health. And they, you know, the U.S. tried to smear one of the key medical experts, Professor Koppelman, and this was thrown out. What they did accept, however, they accepted these diplomatic assurances given by the U.S. And these assurances say a couple of things. They say that Assange can serve his sentence in Australia. They say that Assange won't be placed in special administrative measures or SAMs, and that he won't be jailed at ADX Florence. And they also say that he'll be given medical assistance. Now, the problem with these assurances is that if you read them, you take them at face value, they have holes in them this large, right? So when they say, for example, he can serve his sentence in Australia, you know, the U.S. can't just say, oh, Assange can serve his sentence on the moon or in Tanzania or in Australia and just make it so. Under the Strasbourg Treaty for prison transfers, the other country must say yes. So unless Australia says yes, this is completely meaningless. And well, guess what? Australia have said nothing. How do I know this? Because I've been covering the court case, and Kevin will tell you the same thing. So this is a gaping hole in that assurance. And of course, Australia being a Five Eyes country, the U.S. can just, you know, go through back channels and tell them, don't take Assange. You know, that wouldn't be too far-fetched, regardless of what, or, you know, of how the what is that they have not said they would take Assange. So number one, that, you know, that doesn't work as of now. The other thing about ADX Florence and not being placed in SAMs, I mean, Assange's lawyers raised this point that, you know, you have special housing units, you have communication management units. They have so many, you know, creative ways to put someone in these various hellholes. So, you know, whether it's you call it SAMs or you call it ASHU or whatever it is, whatever prison, if it's not ADX Florence, it could be another jail. The suicide trigger, which the judge found to be the problem, is that it's isolation. Isolating Assange would lead him to commit suicide. So again, you know, they could not put him in SAMs. They could go put him in a CMU like Daniel Hale and say, see, we never placed them in SAMs. We didn't break the assurance. And this is how you play these games. And if you look at the assurance, they say that they won't put him in SAMs or at ADX unless he does something to warrant the imposition of SAMs. You know, he could just cough in his jail cell or say, you know, tell his Stella Moris, his partner, say hi to the kids, and they could interpret that as some sort of code and then punish him for it. You know, I think Chris Hedges raised that point earlier. And then the other thing about the medical assurance, they don't say Assange will get medical. They don't say Assange will get medical treatment or psychological treatment. They say he'll get medical treatment under the recommendation of the prison doctor, whatever that means, right? You know, they could put him in front of any physician who says, no, you're fine, and then we don't give you anything. And, you know, the thing with the assurances, which is so shocking, is that the United States has given very, very, very similar assurances before to other people. They do this quite often, actually. And one of the people that Assange's lawyers mentioned is David Mendoza. And he was extradited from Spain to the U.S. in 2009. And he was told a very, very similar thing. He was also told you can serve your sentence in your home country in Spain, right? Just like they're telling Assange you can serve your sentence in your home country, Australia. Well, guess what? They lied. Because once he got to the U.S., they kept him there for 7 years. 3 times they denied his application. I published all these documents. And the thing with Mendoza, it goes even further. They didn't just send a diplomatic note. This is the diplomatic note from the U.S. Embassy in Madrid. They didn't just send this. They signed a contract with him. So right here, this is the signature of the U.S. Embassy in Madrid of David Mendoza and Spain. And the contract goes even further. It says you have to comply, meaning you, the United States, you have to send him back to Spain. You can't give him a life sentence and these other conditions. So it's even more explicit. It's a contract. It's not an assurance. It's legally binding. The United States, they broke this too, and they wouldn't give him a document. He asked for this document under a FOIA request, and they told him it's classified, even though he read it and signed it. His signature is on the paper.
Wow.
So he was lucky to get this because a Spanish judge sent him this document anonymously. And there are, of course, all the other documents that they don't want you to see because, diplomatic notes are classified and so on and so on. So in Mendoza's case, Assange's lawyers, they said, look at Mendoza's case. Look at Abu Hamza's case. And do you know what the high court judges said last Friday? They said they looked at them and they found nothing wrong. I mean, I'm just shocked, because I think from the high court ruling, what they wrote, they said that they looked at their cases and said that, the United States might be expected to follow the assurances to a word, to the letter. That means they know the assurances are vague, and the United States is acting within this ambiguity, and therefore they're not breaking the assurances. So the UK judges, I mean, I'm just I'm flabbergasted, for lack of a better word, at their judgment, because they have either only seen this document, the verbal note, or they have seen the other documents. And they're just, they're playing a dirty game here. I don't know what it is. I can't tell you what the judges have seen or not seen, but I'm telling you one thing. These documents never appeared in court. So, these documents did not appear in the extradition hearing, in the high court, nothing. And I think it's absolutely shameful that my country, the UK, is allowing this to happen. They're allowing an Australian citizen to be taken from the UK to the US. He's not American. He never worked in America. He never published anything in America. And this is really bad because the United States plays this game with a lot of people. They give them these ambiguous assurances, which allow them such wiggle room that they can back out of them and say that they didn't violate them. And the judges are accepting this. I mean, I'm just, what is there to say?
Yeah. They engineered the outcome they wanted.
Imperial bully status. When you're the world's sole superpower.
Yeah.
That's what you do.
Richard, the fact that Britain is being so weak in front of the United States, at a time when there's this rising authoritarianism, at a time when attacks on the press are such a big issue everywhere, we've seen how these rights are being diminished in the United States. And we've been hoping that other European countries, Australia, et cetera, would uphold these human values, these democratic values, at a time when they're so clearly being diminished in the United States. This must make you feel rather ashamed. It's like out of a scene out of Love Actually or something, where they were begging the prime minister not to be a pussy to the U.S. president.
David Mendoza, he told me something because I interviewed him multiple times, and he told me that he doesn't blame the U.S. because you have to keep in mind he's a U.S. national and a Spanish national, right? And he said he doesn't blame the U.S. For what they did to him, for ruining his life. By the way, they took $14 million in assets from him. They tried to get him to come back to the U.S. by seizing his assets without filing a criminal indictment. So it's kind of like a game to get him back. And he said he doesn't blame the U.S. He blames Spain for allowing the U.S. to do this. And I have to agree with him because, it's one thing for the Americans to be this way. It's one thing for the United States government to violate its own laws, break its own agreements, criminalize journalism and do these things. But it's another thing for the European countries to allow this to happen. This is not just about Assange. This is not just about Mendoza. If you look at it in terms of extraditions, they have a whole extradition complex, how they extradite people from Colombia, from Mexico, from Latin and Central America. And now they're testing the waters with the UK. This is really, you've had Gary McKinnon up until now. I interviewed him as well. Lori Love, their extraditions were blocked. And this is really about testing the waters. And I just want to say one thing. I mean, the press freedom aspect of it is, of course, it's unequivocal. It's central to this whole Assange case. But right now in court, they don't care about press freedoms. They're not talking about press freedoms in court. They're talking about these diplomatic assurances. And this is what we have to highlight, that they can't be trusted. Because, it's one thing to criminalize the journalism, which, Jesus Christ, I mean, I don't need to tell you guys how bad this is. But it's another thing to see your own country's judges, to see UK judges allow the United States to game the system. And this is what they do, because once you're in U.S. jurisdiction, you're screwed. There is nothing you can do anymore.
Sorry. And Kevin, I don't want to leave you out, so I want to ask you what you, as an American journalist, what you're most ashamed of your country doing in the States. But
it's dangerous in the world.
And I suppose Richard and I could go back and forth over whose government is the worst in all of this, because certainly I would be willing to make the case that the U.S. government, which is using all of its power, is the one that should be focused. And to just add some detail to what Richard was saying about these diplomatic assurances, I'd like to highlight something that Richard now mentioned, Chris Hedges mentioned, which is this communications management unit, which was completely left out, it appears, when the High Court considered the assurances that were given to them about the prison conditions that could be imposed on Julian Assange. And these communications management units are something that exist in 2 prison facilities in the U.S. that were developed under the war on terrorism when President George W. Bush was in office. And there's one in Marion, Illinois, and there's one in Terre Haute, Indiana. And the facility in Marion is where drone whistleblower Daniel Hale is currently at. And he, by the way, was betrayed by the Bureau of Prisons, because when he was prosecuted, he had proceedings in which the judge, the prosecutor, and his defense attorneys agreed that he would go to a federal medical center in North Carolina, which was designed to provide, prisons are the worst place to go for any sort of health care. You can't count on them to provide any sort of treatment. But there are facilities that are geared particularly for people who have medical conditions. That's where NSA whistleblower Reality Winner went. She went to Carswell in Fort Worth, Texas. And they were going to send Daniel Hale, because he has post-traumatic stress disorder and suffers a moral injury from the drone program, to Butner. But he ended up being shipped after he languished in a transfer facility for a couple months. They sent him to Marion, Illinois, and he arrived there and he had no idea that he was going to be sent there. But when he got there, he learned he was designated for a CMU. These CMUs are responsible for tons of due process violations, which the Center for Constitutional Rights have sued in court to challenge. And in it, what's really important, the point I want to hammer home for people, is that they have more strict visiting rules than what exists in supermax prisons. That is to say that if Stella and his children wanted to visit him in this facility, because he would be designated for a CMU, they would not be able to touch him. There would be no hugging allowed. There's no kissing allowed. You can't embrace your children. They can't sit on your lap. You cannot have the standard interactions that you typically have in prisons, like what CIA whistleblower John Kiriakou was able to have when he was incarcerated at Loretto in Pennsylvania. And you also have an FBI agent who is detailed to monitoring your conversations while you are in prison. So you have a restriction. There's a list. You have a very limited list of who you can contact. Daniel Hale only has one person on his approved list right now who he can contact. It's a friend, Noor Mir, who is a longtime activist and friend who's based in D.C. And every other person, like, let's say, Thomas Drake or Kiriakou, who other whistleblowers that have been providing him emotional support, are not able to contact him on the phone right now. So he's there isolated. This is what they can do to Julian Assange. I think it's really important to hammer home that this is not part of the decision at the High Court. And so all of this can be done to Julian Assange outside of any kind of good faith agreements they have made. So there are actual ways in which they can keep their agreements, their pledges, and then come up with new things they can do to terrorize Julian Assange.
Wow, that's absolutely terrifying. Kevin and Richard, thank you guys so much for joining us.
Followed their work.
In these short segments, you just packed it full of substance and you educated the audience phenomenally well. So thank you so much for what you're doing and following the trial and keep spreading the word. And keep it up, guys. That was really something special that we did.
Thank you for throwing this all together. It's really incredible. Keep up. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, guys.
Doing what we can.
So much for the fact that our Constitution says we can't have cruel and unusual punishment.
That's right. Yeah. You know, they reminded me when they were talking about how the U.S. just violates its word. I was reminded of a story I covered. The International Criminal Court, we were told you can't sanction medicine going into Iran because that's part of our sanctions against Iran. And the United States response to that was to say, we disagree. And so we pulled out of the court and kept sanctioning.
That's why we're not in the criminal court.
Disgusting.
It's unbelievable what goes on.
They call it, Norman Finkelstein calls it the International Caucasian Court because it only...
And the International Clown Court, you know, at this point.
Yeah. Well, that was amazing, and we're going to bring in another fearless journalist. She is the creator of the Empire Files. She's the host of the Media Roots podcast. She's also a visual artist, and she's the director of the amazing documentary Gaza Fights for Freedom.
Guys, gotta watch that.
That's so good.
Yeah,
you gotta see
that. She's also been accused, this is probably her biggest achievement, she's been accused by the U.S. government of, quote, fomenting radical discontent.
I want to get that label.
Yeah, wow, that is
Why don't I have that
We're
one?
all so intimidated right now. We feel so inadequate.
And she asked Nancy Pelosi recently.
And she
that's right.
I covered that. Good job, Abby. I like that one.
Yeah, thank God for being able to hide. Thank you.
Thank you.
Abby, wanted to ask you about all the journalism that you've been able to do thanks to the revelations of WikiLeaks.
Yeah, I was just curious. I went through the Breaking the Set archives and just searched Assange and WikiLeaks, and it yielded like hundreds of results. I mean, it just reminded me of how central WikiLeaks' reporting and revelations were to my entire journalistic career, and also just my radicalization as an anti-war activist at the beginning, of my political life. I mean, it's amazing to see the stenography and kind of dutiful acquiescence on behalf of the corporate media in a post 9/11 world. And it was because of WikiLeaks' reporting that we saw the true atrocities and crimes committed. I mean, I don't think that we really would have known the true extent of the horrors in this reign of terror if it was not for Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, because of what was happening in the corporate media. I mean, they were actually acting as if the U.S. was this benevolent force and doing good in the world, because it was such a propagandized conditioning of patriotism, right? And this American exceptionalism. I mean, let's go back to Guantanamo. We know about the Guantanamo detainees being rounded up, basically innocent people, for bounties, allegedly because they were Al-Qaeda and Taliban, from WikiLeaks. These were a series of files that were released right after 9/11, or not right after 9/11, but as soon as WikiLeaks was created, to show us really how ridiculous that was, how so many innocent men were being held that did nothing at all, right? And then the Iraq war logs really did cement the end to the Iraq war. I don't think people really know the story. I wanted to tell it really quickly. The collateral murder video was really the tip of the iceberg. There were so many countless innocent people that were mowed down in vehicles at checkpoints in Iraq. And no one really knew about that until the Iraq war logs came out. And it really ended the war because Obama was actually trying to extend the status of forces agreement. He had Robert Gates on the ground in Baghdad talking about extending the troops. And there was such a huge resistance mounting in Iraq that they said, absolutely not. I mean, the government was just like, we're not going to extend the status of forces agreement unless we can actually prosecute U.S. soldiers in Iraqi courts because of these crimes. And so Obama had no choice. They basically had to pull out because there was threats of 100,000 people. Actually, there was 100,000 people marching, armed resistance fighters, at the time that Robert Gates was there in Baghdad, and saying, if you don't leave, we're going to just fight you. Chelsea Manning and Assange, what they accomplished is the reason why they were both targeted for prison, because in a major way, they exposed this humiliation, this embarrassment of having to end a war that the U.S. wanted to continue. Afghanistan war logs, the mass recording of Afghan telephone calls. This wasn't just collecting metadata. This was collecting every single phone call, listening to every phone call. I mean, how is the opium trade? How was it continuing for 20 years if the NSA was collecting and being able to listen to every single phone call going out of Afghanistan? I mean, that's pretty extreme. How is that possible? 3 more things about Afghanistan really quickly, and then I want to turn it over to you guys. I mean, the Daesh-e-Lay massacre, the Garani massacre, and Operation Medusa. These are things that Julian Assange talked about extensively. They were never covered properly by the legacy media, and he said that as such. 2001, 2,000 Taliban fighters were basically killed, buried in a mass grave, put in container trucks, and suffocated. These are the people who are now back in charge of Afghanistan. I mean, that is an insane thing that happened. The Garani massacre, this was another release. Someone internally inside WikiLeaks destroyed this video. It was the part of the Manning war logs, but it showed 147 Afghan civilians being killed in a single airstrike by a B-1 bomber. This was in 2009. This could have ended the Afghanistan war if this video was released. I mean, it would have been more powerful than the collateral murder video. And that was released with the Manning war logs. One more thing, Operation Medusa. This was a NATO operation, a C-130 cargo plane that rained down shells and killed 181 enemy. I don't know what that means. As we know, an enemy combatant can be anyone that's a military-age male. This is the largest event that the most people were killed in Afghanistan, and it's never been properly investigated. And, then you can go on and on. Vault 7, I think that, of course, the DNC leaks and the Podesta files really did cement the hatred for Assange, on top, of course, of all the exposing of the war crimes. But I think the establishment forgive him for what he did to expose Hillary.
Abby, I think Marianne has a question for you, but while she's asking, I think we're getting a little double audio on your end. I don't know if you can turn your speakers down just so you can still hear us, but we're hearing ourselves back a little bit. Go ahead, Marianne.
Well, basically, I just want to thank you, Abby, for continuing to talk about the Afghanistan war. I think it's so hideous the way, okay, that's over, now let's move on. And as you said, and as we talked about earlier, actually on the show, if the revelations from WikiLeaks back in 2010 about Afghanistan had been truly listened to and truly taken to heart, then maybe the last 10, 11 years of horror would not have continued the way they did. It's important that people realize this war was an utter failure in terms of it going right back to the Taliban, but a great success for the military-industrial complex. Yeah. This war cost $2.3 trillion, and $2 trillion of that, of course, went to the MIC. And, of course, it was the most horrifying moral failures in all the ways that you're saying. So I just really wanted to say thank you for refusing to shut up about it, because this is what we do every time. And this is why the country is so open to the next debacle, whatever it might be, whether it was Vietnam to Iraq to Afghanistan. So really, I just wanted to say thank you.
Well, we all agree. Abby's a phenomenal journalist.
Fierce.
Yeah.
Fearless.
Abby, I want to ask you something slightly different, because this has been on my mind too. First of all, there are plenty of people who think that Julian Assange is, being prosecuted because of the 2016 leaks on the DNC. That's just factually wrong. They're going after him for, what Chelsea Manning gave him and basically leaking on war crimes that the U.S. was committing. But, at the time, I did notice like a split on the left where there were, people on the left who were like, oh, I can't believe he's leaking it at this time. Would he leak it on the RNC? And, it's basically exposing all the dirty laundry of the DNC. And I remember thinking at the time, like I said to Glenn earlier, I don't know if you were watching, but I said, listen, if the things are factual, like, I don't know what we're arguing about here. It's like you can kill the messenger, but you should actually talk about what the message is. Like, look at what actually happened. So what's your sense of, when there seemed to be a shift in the tide and some people started to turn on Assange? Do you feel like he was almost in no man's land where he wasn't getting nearly as much support because of the 2016 thing? And talk to that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, if Hillary Clinton had said she wanted to drone strike me, I totally understand why he wanted to release. It's totally insane. I mean, look, Trump was a wild card, and he had no idea what was going to happen during that administration. I think that he knew that Hillary Clinton, there was no chance at all for him. Of course, Trump was on record saying he wanted to hang Assange, he wanted the death penalty. And of course, we know that that was a carrot on a stick, complete cynical plot to basically have people provide cover for Trump for 4 years while he pretended like he might pardon Assange. Instead, he pardoned the most heinous war criminals imaginable.
That's right.
But yes, to your point, Kyle, it was really devastating to see this kind of partisan nature play out, where people all of a sudden abandoned advocating for the First Amendment and just said, oh no, I detest Assange as a person. Oh no, he provided cover for, Trump and and the DMs with Donald Trump Jr. It's like none of that actually matters.
Yeah, you're right.
Julian, this isn't even about Assange. This is about WikiLeaks. This is about the organization that Assange created to provide space. And that's what the establishment wanted to completely obliterate. They wanted to set an example that you can never utilize what the structure that Assange created and have people like Chelsea Manning, as long as there's another rebellious soldier like a Chelsea Manning, as long as there's another vehicle for that soldier to use to expose crimes that are coming from within our foreign policy establishment, they cannot have that. They will not tolerate that. And the smear campaign that came out in the corporate media worked. It worked in droves.
Yeah, it did.
I think supporting Julian Assange for years, all of a sudden completely abandoning him. Oh, well, I hate him. He did this, he did that. Most of it's completely false. And again, I don't care what you think about Assange as a person. This is not about him. Like Susan Sarandon said, this is about us. This is about the foundation and principles of this country and our Constitution. And if you're not going to support that, who are you? What are you fighting for? What is it about?
The problem is how many Americans don't even know what those principles are. We have 10 states in the United States that don't even require half a year of civics education, American history, American government. It's amazing how many Americans don't even know what these principles are that we're so passionate about here tonight. And I think a lot of that has to do with the failure of our educational system.
Or how about all the states that have criminalized BDS and require Abby Martin to sign loyalty oaths in order to speak at a public university in the state of Georgia, as one example.
Right. So yet again, Abby, you're on the front lines of the free speech wars.
Yeah.
And
We'll visit you
the right-wingers who scream about college kids with pink hair have nothing on you, because you're actually literally fighting legal battles and
winning
and
Guys,
breaking important stories.
We never thought Chelsea Manning would get her sentence commuted. It's because of the struggle on the ground. It's the fight, the pressure, and the momentum that built, and we can do it again. The idea that Trump was the last best hope, it was never the case.
Yeah.
We need to continue to fight because it's still possible that we can pardon him. We just have to build the movement to do it. Thank you so much, you guys, for doing this. He deserves to be home with his children and his fiance, and it pains me that he's in jail suffering, and we have to fight till our last breath to make him free. Thank you so much.
Here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Abby. We appreciate it big time.
Wow, I got chills from that. I got chills.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I think she sends a very important message of hope that it is possible, that even though government administration after administration hated him and came after him, and even though they want to punish him, they want to make an example out of him, they want to hide these secrets, it's not impossible with a groundswell of support to shame them into changing their actions, because we have seen it happen before.
I just have to say one thing. Shame on all of you journalists, and shame on you, Joe Biden, for being Trumpian. Again, I have to just say this. You're siding with Cheeto Mussolini. Go with your guy Obama. Stop being the authoritarian, free press attacking strong man that you claim to detest.
Ushering in fascism.
And the media is leaving it to us to have to do a free Assange event. This should be on CNN in prime time. You know what I mean?
And that's the thing is, like, unfortunately, MSNBC and CNN, those are the networks that the Biden administration watches and listens to
and they're
are
arguing
influenced
over
by.
The word Karen. That's the conversation they're having.
I literally can't imagine having that kind of platform and having said the right things when it was Trump.
Past,
and then...
Right. Rachel Maddow, can you just clarify to us why it's okay to indict Assange? You called that an attack on the free press, on the First Amendment. So what has changed? Is it only that it's Biden? Are you that partisan? Are you that much of a hack?
Yes.
Are you that unprincipled?
The answer is yes.
Come on. No, at least, guys, pretend to have any principles. I'm just embarrassed for you. You're such sellouts, and you deserve to be treated like... Not very well.
Well, there is such a thing.
I'm not going to cry. I don't wish Assange treatment on anyone. I'm just saying, don't you have any
there is such a thing as healthy shame.
Right.
There is such a thing as healthy shame. And Crystal was saying that we have to keep up the fight and that good things can happen. And some good things do seem to be happening in the case of Stephen Donziger. At the very least, the fact that so many people are aware, and I think the more we can do to raise awareness, the better. Yeah. When I called Stephen Donziger and I asked him if he would be with us this evening to talk about Julian Assange, he's very clear that they are both political prisoners. He's very clear that in both cases, whether it was Chevron with Stephen or the U.S. military and the U.S. government with Assange, that these prosecutions are meant to have a chilling effect on human rights lawyers, environmental activists, and in the case of Assange, on journalists. I'm happy to tell you, not that you'd be surprised, that the response I got from Stephen Donziger when asked if he'd join us tonight is, it would be my honor. So it's our honor to have him.
It's our honor, Stephen. It's great to see you.
Long time no see, Stephen.
Thank you. I know. Tell me about it.
How are you feeling, Stephen? I bet this brings up a lot for you listening tonight.
Oh, yeah. And I first of all, thanks to all of you for pulling this together for Julian. Julian represents something greater than Julian. And in my view, what he represents is, the ability to take on entrenched interests in our society, be they the national security state of the US government, or in my case, in the case of other environmental defenders, the fossil fuel industry that's destroying our planet. And I think that the playbook that's being used against Julian and the one being used against me are very similar. And they basically call on focus on one person as a symbol to try to intimidate and silence many other people. In Julian's case, that would be journalists and whistleblowers. And in my case, it would be using me to try to silence lawyers and human rights campaigners and environmental activists from taking on the big polluters and taking on the fossil fuel industry that continues to engage in practices that threaten the earth and threaten the future of all of our kids, our grandkids. These cases are, or I should say these attacks are dressed up as legal cases. But as Dr. Melzer and Chris Hedges so eloquently pointed out, the legal case against Julian is a big nothing burger. It's really just made up. The attack happens and then they put a veneer of law or try to put a veneer of law over it to make it look like it's a normal kind of case. And in my situation, I'm not sure if everybody knows who I am or what I did, but I represented indigenous peoples down in Ecuador who sued Chevron for probably the world's worst oil pollution. We ended up winning a $10 billion judgment, and Chevron sued me for $60 billion back in the United States. It's the most amount of money any individual in our country has ever been sued over. And the case in Ecuador was affirmed by the Supreme Court of Ecuador, the Canadian Supreme Court for enforcement purposes. You had a single judge here in New York, a federal judge who comes out of the right wing of the federal judiciary, really did Chevron's bidding. He charged me with criminal contempt of court when I refused to turn over my computer and cell phone to Chevron. That is all the attorney-client protected information. And without a jury, he orchestrated a situation where I was put in prison or given a 6-month sentence for supposedly violating his court order. To me, this was all made up because no lawyer who did what I did has ever been charged with criminal contempt of court before me or ever spent even a day in jail. I don't want to compare myself too much to Julian, given the intense degree of suffering. And I thought Noam Chomsky put it beautifully when he said the savagery to which he has been subjected. But I have also been attacked severely and imprisoned, although I'm now at home serving the rest of my sentence rather than up in Danbury. But, this is all designed to shut people up and to intimidate. And I salute y'all for explaining this and doing the work that the big media should be doing, but because of cowardice is not. And by the way, on the media front, I've also experienced the fact that the New York Times has almost completely ignored my story. Even though I live a 30-minute walk from New York Times headquarters, and I've been locked up in my home now for over 850 days, well over 2 years on a misdemeanor criminal contempt of court charge. So these cases are very similar. It's about picking out a symbol, attacking the symbol with a manufactured legal case in an effort to silence and intimidate others who might do the same thing, that is challenge entrenched interests that are threatening our democracy. That's sort of how I see it.
Threatening our world.
Yeah. Can you talk about what it was like? And I know you just said that you're not comparing yourself to Assange because of the degrees of magnitude and the levels of torture. But what was it like for you to be separated for the number of days that you were separated from your families and your loved ones? What was that like psychologically?
It was brutal. Brutal. And, I can only think of what Julian is going through. he had a stroke. He's in a maximum security, very difficult prison over in England. I was in a relatively low security prison, although I was there during a COVID lockdown, and it felt like a real hard prison. But prison is so isolating. It cuts you off from people who love you. It prevents you from communicating to the outside. For example, where I was, there were 2 phones for 80 people, and you couldn't talk for more than a few minutes a day. And there was always a line for the phone, and you couldn't even have a normal conversation with anyone from the outside, a natural flowing conversation. And in the United States federal prison system, just to send an email, they charge inmates money to communicate to the outside. Most inmates have very little or no money, so they can't even send emails. There's a scarcity of food, and the conditions to which Julian is being subjected are harsh. I mean, I think Dr. Melzer considered it, torture in violation of international law. And I'll point out that even though I was in for a misdemeanor, and again, I assert my innocence, my case, by the way, is under appeal, but I still had to go in and start serving my sentence. The experience of being cut off is part of the playbook, which is to intimidate you and intimidate others and to silence those who speak out. And, I know, as Chris pointed out, this has been going on a long time in our history. I think in my case, this has never happened before. That is, I've been prosecuted not by the U.S. government, but by a private law firm with Chevron as a client. And in Julian's case, something has happened that's never happened before, which, the U.S. government is trying to call standard issue journalism, muckraking journalism, espionage. So, the more the people are able to sort of challenge these interests, the more creative the forces that try to silence them. Again, in Julian's case, it's the government and the national security state. In my case, it's the fossil fuel industry that sort of took control of the machinery of the government or part of the judiciary to attack me. Their methods become more sophisticated, and they begin to break new ground, as I think they have done in Julian's case and certainly have done in my case. And I think the challenge for us is to, A, notice it, and B, organize to make sure it doesn't happen again. I mean, not only that Julian should be freed and I should be freed, but no one else is subjected to these kinds of what I would call manufactured legal attacks designed to undermine free speech and undermine democratic values, which is what they really are.
Much for joining us. There's literally nobody on the planet who could speak to what's going on with Julian as well as you, given that you were in a somewhat comparable situation, although, orders of magnitude different, so on and so forth. But you really gave phenomenal insight as to what it's like inside the belly of the beast. So thanks again for joining. And just a shameless plug real quick, everybody needs to check out Crystal Kyle and Friends when it drops tomorrow, because we spoke to Stephen, and boy, was it powerful. Yeah. All I'll say was, little spoiler alert, there were tears.
Yeah.
And it was from multiple people.
Yeah.
So I'll say that. Stephen, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Great to see
you.
You
People,
Take
we
care.
have to remember that unfettered governmental power will proceed inch by inch and take whatever power the people allow it to have. And this is why the regulation of government, the realization of what these people are doing, our willingness to say hell no when it's time to say hell no is so very, very important, because it is the nature of the beast. This is what authoritarianism is. It takes whatever you'll allow it to take. And it's time now for the people to stand up. That seems so clear.
I was telling Crystal earlier, look at the Patriot Act. They call it the Patriot Act so that they could say, you're against patriotism, bro?
So
but then they use it to be like,
Act.
we're going to spy on everybody and take away your Eighth Amendment protection from, or Fourth Amendment protection from unreasonable search and seizure.
Which is what they do with Julian. Oh, he put service members at risk. Oh,
Never
which one?
providing any
Never
it's
naming a single name.
So I want to bring in phenomenal journalist Ryan Grimm. He writes over at The Intercept. He's the host of Rising as well. Thanks for joining us, Ryan. My first question to you is, what do you think? So there's like a disconnect between, you talk to regular people or you talk to like average Joe and Jane political junkies, and they feel a certain way about Julian Assange. But then like you look around Washington, D.C. and people who actually have power, whether it's in media or government, and it's the polar opposite reaction. It's just like of course, obviously he should be locked up. Like, duh. What accounts for that disconnect, and what is it in the mindset of the D.C. folks that leads them terribly astray?
And there's a third reaction actually that exists here, which is genuine ignorance. Like, there are a lot of people that I've noticed in D.C. who are in positions of power, like staff level positions of power. I haven't talked to them, who don't know that this is happening. Like, it just are unaware of it. Like, it's not even on their radar. People like mid-level people who work at the White House, mid-level people who work in like House and Senate leadership that I'll talk to, who aren't in like decision-making positions. And so I will raise the question of Assange to them just to get a temperature check for where they are, where people above them are. And they're like, what's going on? That's still happening? We're still doing that?
Wow.
That's how far off the radar it is. Now the people who do understand that it's happening and are aware of it, it's a mixture. For the Democrats, they either have the Russiagate brainworms from 2016 and want anybody who was even remotely connected to the 2016 election to rot in prison forever, and that would include Assange. And you can tell them, well, he's not charged with anything connected to 2016, and they're like, whatever, like let him fry. And the way that, and what journalists have done, and I think there's a lot of psychoanalyzing that you can do around this, and rationalizing that you can do around it, is that they keep saying, well, they tell themselves, and they'll say it if they're pressed, he's not a journalist. He's not really a journalist. And part of that, I think, Glenn talks a lot about the kind of the professional jealousy because of the number of stories of consequence that he's broken compared to the entire rest of the media. Actually, like you could probably stack his body of work against almost everything produced, over the past 15 years, and it would be nearly comparable, like the magnitude of the revelations. I think that's part of it, but I don't think that's all of it. I think part of it is it's easier. They think that if they can convince themselves and convince other people that he's not a journalist, then they can then believe that there's no precedent being set.
It won't affect them.
They're wrong, of course. Like any judge or a prosecutor who decides that they want to go after the next journalist can easily use the precedent. So I mean, they're completely wrong. But I think from a self-preservational rationalization perspective, if they can cleave him out and say, well, he's not, he's a hacker, he's a whistleblower, he's something else,
right,
than a journalist, then the First Amendment is not actually under assault, and the free press is not under assault, because it would be much more comfortable to believe that it's not under assault. Like if you can believe that, and you can rationalize your way there, then that's what a lot of people are going to rationalize themselves toward. So I think all of those things are going on because it's sort of like staring into Medusa's face is just too difficult, and so it's better to just look away.
Well, I'm curious, Ryan, what you think might be the best, both sort of tactics and also the best messaging. Katie has suggested that perhaps pointing out, listen, to liberals, this started under Trump. All we want is Biden to go back to what Obama was doing. Biden should be like Obama, not like Trump. That was one suggestion. Congressman Khanna, who joined us earlier, said, listen, we need to take Julian Assange out of this because people feel a whole lot of ways about him and just focus on the free speech part. What do you think is the most effective messaging? And then in terms of tactics, what do you think could actually work to shame the Biden administration into doing the right thing here?
I think it's free. I think it's free speech and Obama, like those two things together. Like the most effective ad probably that ran for Cori Bush, when she beat Lacey Clay, was the one where they attacked Lacey Clay for selling out to Wall Street. But it wasn't selling out to Wall Street that really landed the death blow to him. It was that in order to do Wall Street's bidding, Lacey Clay had broken with the Treasury Department under the Obama administration. And so they framed it as Lacey Clay, screwed over Obama. And it was true. It happened. So it wasn't like they were lying, but they felt like they couldn't go directly at the class argument, the corruption argument. That there had to be a Team Blue, Team Obama, cleavage that you could drive, and it worked. And they elected Cori Bush, ironically. So I think that point that Katie makes is a good one. Like Obama was right. Now, that's not going to work on Biden because, Biden is very much motivated by proving that he is right. And so I think that will work on a lot of MSNBC viewers and that crowd to the extent that you can get them interested in it. That's a message for them, but it's not a message for Biden. Because, Biden wants to spite Obama because he feels like he was not respected.
Yeah.
Right.
If you tell Biden he gets a free brunch at Denny's if he pardons Julian Assange, she might be all in.
Well, yeah. What do you think would work on Biden? Do you have any idea what would work on him?
I think if people haven't seen Mehdi Hassan's clip on Julian Assange, I think that was probably a masterclass in messaging to the liberals, because he knows exactly who his audience is, and he's trying to talk to them, and he's trying to defang all of their problems that they've got to escape. I think what Biden needs is influential liberals in his circle taking the cause up. There needs to be some cause. So Mehdi taking it up is a great step because that moves the concentric circle a little bit closer because now it's in the MSNBC world.
The problem is Joanne Reed isn't going to say anything, and Rachel Maddow isn't going to say anything. She did in 2018.
Maybe they could be shamed into it. Maybe.
You think they could?
Maybe Rachel Maddow.
Rachel, I know you're watching this stream. Get your act together.
Prove him wrong.
I see you.
I believe in you. I believe in you being able to, actually try to more persuasively pull off being principled.
I'm calling for a complete shutdown of MSNBC until we can do it.
I'm calling for some healthy shaming of 534 Congress people.
That's right.
I thought you were going to say shaming the 534 viewers that MSNBC has left.
Also, Daniel Ellsberg, that's another one we should throw in there. That's another good argument for libs. Well, Daniel Ellsberg is a champion for Julian Assange.
True. Many libs don't know much about Daniel Ellsberg,
but they know that
Biden might because they went to kindergarten together. Yeah. All right, Ryan, thanks so much.
We love you, Ryan. Thank you.
Doing this ageism. Thanks, Ryan. Thank you.
Now that I'm done with my ageism for the day, I filled my ageism quota for the day.
Yeah.
I wasn't going after 25-year-olds. You're fine.
Hey, well played, Kyle.
That's what I do.
Oh, we're so much better.
Well, let's just keep the show rolling, shall we?
I think we shall.
All right. So we're going to bring in our two next esteemed guests. We are so excited to be bringing in two people who use the microphone to raise awareness about so many issues, including Julian Assange, the comedian Randy Credico, comedian, activist, and host of Live on the Fly with Randy Credico, and the musician and activist, you may have heard of him, Roger Waters.
Icon,
yes. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
He is an icon.
It's a wrap. Thanks for coming now. Why is Julian Assange so... Can you hear it, Roger?
You're not speaking to me.
Oh, no, we're speaking to you too. You're also...
No, well, you weren't speaking to me. I was saying, can you hear me? But I was mouthing it because I don't know who that bloke in the lumberjack shirt was who was chatting away just now. I couldn't hear a word he was saying. So I hope
was a little low.
in audience land.
He had a microphone issue. They tried to jack it up in the control room. I think he thought his USB mic was plugged in and it wasn't. But they tried to jack up the audio. Anyway, on that.
Well, welcome. We can hear you loud and clear. And tell us why Assange is so important to both of you and why you've dedicated so much of your lives, honestly, at this point to speaking out on his behalf.
Start with you, Randy.
Go on, Randy. You tell him, mate.
Oh, you're right. I can't follow you. I mean, look, you've heard it from everybody else tonight. There's not much I can add. The man is a hero. The repercussions of his extradition to this country and being jacked away into a concentration camp, in Colorado, the repercussions are tremendous and widespread for everybody. So this is not, as everyone has said earlier, not just a fight for Julian Assange, it's a fight to save this fragile ersatz democracy as it is. I mean, we already are at that close to not having a democracy. We need, if it is a democracy, we need to have a free press. We need to have freedom of assembly because that will be next. You four will be gone if Julian Assange is gone. I'm not sure if the people at the MSNBC and CNN would be gone. And I just want to say people should stop complaining about MSNBC and CNN. I mean, they are entertainment shows. Don't expect news from them. It's like expecting the Newlywed Game to be talking about Julian Assange or the Dating Game, Jeff Lang talking about Julian Assange. They're not going to do it. It's a fool's errand to expect them to do it. So what we need is as many people as you folks all have your own podcasts to go out there and continue to, get the choir revved up and get their choir onto the street, organize civil disobedience. That's what we have to do at this point. That's the solution because we cannot wait for Chris Hayes or Ari Melber or Joy-Ann Reid or the two guys that look like Jim Sciotto and Jim Acosta to come out and support Julian Assange. That's not where it's going to happen. Roger, now that's easy to follow.
None of this is easy to follow, right? I find it almost impossible to speak on this issue anymore because I feel numb and not comfortably numb, just to be daft for a minute. I feel really, really uncomfortably numbed out by the fact that this is actually happening here where I live and also in the country where I was born, in front of my very eyes now in 2021. It beggars belief, that I've survived this long since the Second World War to witness this complete joke, travesty, insane nonsense that's going on here and in the UK as well. I have to keep saying the UK because I would not have believed it until I'd seen it with my own eyes that we over there in the UK are just as ineffably dumb, blind, stupid, ridiculous, fascist, and all the other epithets that I could throw at the camera right now to be doing this to one of the great men of the 20th and 21st century, Julian Assange, one of the few people who's got the bollocks to tell the truth about what your government and my government have been doing since the Second World War and how despicable it is. So I'm sorry not to be able to come up with any jokes or to be able to kind of smile really at all or laugh at CNN and MSNBC because although they are funny, they're not funny ha-ha, they're funny, pitiful, pathetic. Why weren't they all out on Second Avenue with me and Randy and a bunch of other people, and Katie, I have to say, and Susan Sarandon, and a number of others? Why weren't they all out on Second Avenue outside the British consulate on Monday? at noon. We were a pitifully small number of people. And as I arrived there, actually, I drove up 2nd Avenue to get to that meeting on Monday at noon. And there were hundreds of thousands of people all on the pavements, all going like that on their iPhones. And I couldn't help thinking, how is this happening? How is it that you are not complaining? My missus actually said to me when I was complaining about this earlier today, she said, you know, most of the people in the United States are so beaten down by the wage slavery that they suffer, or whatever it might be. They're in such dire straits, apart from Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates and about 3 other people who run the whole fucking country, that they have no energy left for thinking about whether the planet's being destroyed or whether it's worth even trying to keep up the pretense that this is a democratic society and that this country cares even in the slightest jot for human rights or the law even. So I'm deeply, deeply depressed by it. My heart goes out to Stella and the children and to Julian himself. We only got the news the other day that he had a minor stroke on the 22nd of October at the beginning of the extradition hearings in the High Court in London. I don't know what else to say. I keep hoping that I'll wake up and this will all have been a disgusting dream, but I know I'm not going to. I know this awful dream is going to go on. I watched Randy's show earlier this evening, and it was very instructive. I was completely glued. It was Thomas Drake and what's her name, Randy? Jesslyn?
Radak.
Radak, exactly. Who is Daniel Hale's legal, she's his attorney, right?
One of them. Yeah, she
One
was.
of his attorneys, yeah. Anyway, she was compelling and beautiful and intelligent and so on, and everything that you could wish for, listening to somebody saying all the things that I'm not saying very well now. And so was Thomas Drake, the great, you know, the whistleblower from 2003, the invasion of Iraq and all of that. And he was incarcerated for his part in the telling of the truth. Isn't it interesting how many of these people worked for the giant blob? For, you know, like my friend Ray McGovern, for instance, was a CIA analyst for 20 years or something before finally whatever happened to him, his light bulb went off and he went, what have I been doing, you know? And there are many, many of them. And so there are many insiders who wake up eventually, they see the light, and they say, nada más, this is crazy, this is insane. So I'll stop with my hyperbole. I'm disgusted and deeply, deeply depressed. There we are. That's all I have to say, really. Thank you for having me on. Do you want to hear a joke?
Yeah, joke. Randy, can you do the...
No, I don't think it's time for joking.
What?
I don't think it's time for
you have a
joking.
question.
Yeah, I don't think it's time for joking, and I think Roger was very eloquent. Both of you were very eloquent. It's not a joking matter. And I think that we have to deconstruct, we have to dismantle the psychology of complacency. I think you're right, Roger, that a lot of people are just beaten down from exhaustion. I think the American people certainly have been trained to expect too little and also to feel powerless. But I think we have to lift ourselves up, or this whole thing is going down. The American experiment is going down. The democratic experiment is going down. And I think perhaps we have to recognize how dangerous this moment is in all the ways that you so eloquently said before enough of us say we have to take the matter into our own hands. It's not just about CNN. It's not just about MSNBC. It's about everybody here calling 202-224-3121, talking to your congresspeople, electing. We're going to have congressional elections in less than a year. Elect those non-corporate backed candidates. You can go to candidatesummit.com for one place where we've certainly endorsed some non-corporate backed candidates, and we just all have to get to work. It's kind of like when people are in an avalanche and, when people freeze to death, it's that they just feel like going to sleep.
Yeah.
And we just say, don't. You can't go to sleep.
You gotta keep going,
we can't let each other go to sleep. We absolutely must say, we're here, we're rising up, and, we're really grateful to all the people who are listening tonight, and we know that you'll go do your thing, and we aren't going to shut up, and we are going to tell truth to power. And if those particular politicians won't do it, and if those particular journalists won't do it, and those particular mainstream characters won't do it, we will do it. And that is what has saved America every single time, and that is what we'll save it this time.
That's it.
I'm ready to run through a wall after hearing that. I love that.
Marianne Williamson for president.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Yes.
Roger and Randy.
Can I just say one thing here before you go?
Sure.
Help out the Assange Defense Fund. Go to the Twitter account of Stella Moris. That's with 1R1. Stella Moris 1 with 1R. And donate to that fund. It's really vital. They're going against the Department of Justice, which has a $200 million investment into this case. They got pennies. So please support.
You're right. Thank you.
Everybody help them out. And also Gabriel Shipton stressed that he wants everybody to write their congressperson. Take the time, take 10 minutes, look up all the information about your congressperson, send them a letter. This stuff actually matters. Like you might think it doesn't, but they're only human. If they wake up one day and they have 300 letters about Julian Assange, they're going to feel it. They're going to feel it. And they're going to be like, whoa, what's going on here? So make a difference, make a difference, make a difference, get involved. Thanks so much, guys. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And Justice for Assange is a website that everyone can go to. Justice number 4, ASSANGE. You get updates there. And if there's any other websites that people want us to make sure that we mention, then put them on the chat, and we'll make sure to get to them. So we now have another amazing guest. So excited to bring her on. She's the author of the excellent book, Prejudential: Black America and the Presidents. She's also executive editor and senior columnist at the Black Agenda Report. Margaret Kimberly, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Of course. Thanks so much for coming on. Can you tell us about the piece that you just wrote about Assange?
Yes. I wrote Why We Must Defend Julian Assange in order to try to energize people so that I understand what Roger means by feeling defeated, but it's important for everybody to know that this man is a political prisoner. And he was made a political prisoner by several U.S. presidents. And Trump is the one who started the prosecution, but Biden is the one continuing it. And I think I was thinking, listening to your other guests, what is the best way to advocate for him? And in all the ways we've said, to write letters and so forth. But I think we have to include him as part of a bigger project. The press don't speak about him because they are basically State Department spokespeople. A lot of liberals are, they follow the dictates of the intelligence state, the surveillance state. So we have to speak out against all of these things. You can't take Julian Assange out. They're not going to treat him well when we have imperialism in force all over the world. So Julian is important, but we have to think about him in a larger context, and it is a bigger fight than Julian himself, as important as he is.
Yeah.
I love what you said there about he's a political prisoner, because there is this problem that arises oftentimes among, Americans, where they feel like, well, that political prisoners that's not something we have. That's something that the official
other
baddie nations have it.
Yeah.
So in the context of take the same set of facts, if it's Iran or China, all of a sudden everybody agrees, obviously a political prisoner. With us, all of a sudden, people might pump the brakes a little bit. My question is, one of the things that frustrates me whenever I see, whether it's the Edward Snowden situation, Daniel Hale, Julian Assange, Stephen Donziger, I always stop and think, well, 40 years from now, 50 years from now, everybody's going to say, well, obviously they were right and obviously they're heroes. And we know that's the case because that's what happened with Daniel Ellsberg. At the time, what he did was like viewed as, oh my God, this is crazy. He's leaking on our troops. But no, everybody in retrospect said he was exposing war crimes and how we're napalming and using Agent Orange on innocent landless peasant villagers in Vietnam. So is that something that frustrates you as well, that when you think of it in a historical context, you fast forward 40 years, you fast forward 50 years, and it's like, well, everybody's going to agree, but right now it's like we're trying to like drag the collective consciousness of America to that point.
Well, you know, it's funny you mentioned Ellsberg, but in Ellsberg's day, the press would push back against the government. Now, with the Pentagon Papers, would any of that happen now?
No.
Would the New York Times or Washington Post compete with each other to see who could expose a government crime? And the answer, unfortunately, is no. So this history may be told by these people who have gone from performing the tasks they were supposed to as journalists, who now act in collusion with the government. So it's the people who have to do this. We have a heavy lift. People are indoctrinated. People are, if you say the word Julian Assange to the average person, the average liberal, they'll say the guy who put Trump in the White House. And that is because of propaganda. We are propagandized into believing that, by the way, there are many political prisoners in this country. Some have been in jail for up to 50 years. Most of them are black people, and most people don't know their names. So he's just the latest one, but people know nothing about the others either. But I think we have a bigger job to do in trying to break down this system that makes this prosecution possible at all. So people can't think that they can vote for Joe Biden and think there's going to be some harm reduction and then be surprised when he does what Trump does. We have a systemic problem. We have a system that we must oppose, a system that we must speak out against. And I think we have to think in a way that's more revolutionary, rather than expecting somebody like Joe Biden, who said nothing will fundamentally change. And he meant that about many different issues. And he obviously meant it about the surveillance state and foreign policy, because 9 times out of 10, he does just what Trump does.
I want you to speak a little bit more to the comment you just made about how there are a lot of political prisoners out there that don't necessarily get the same level of scrutiny. What do you think that the Assange case says about who is criminalized and who is allowed to flagrantly break the law and never face accountability?
Well, you're criminalized if you expose the crimes of the people who have no accountability. We have presidents who get into office, they pardon their friends, they make sure that everything is covered up for past presidents. And those are the people without accountability. And unfortunately, those are the people we're depending on to act against character and suddenly free Julian Assange. This man, they're committed to locking up and hoping that he just wastes away. And I wonder if they really want him to be brought to the United States. He's out of sight, out of mind in another country. If they bring him to Washington to stand trial, what will that do? It may be a little harder to hide his story. But you know, that's another issue. But those are the people who we must agitate against, and we have a lot to agitate against, and we have to rethink many things that may be difficult. Our reliance on electoral politics and expecting change from our electoral system, expecting change from Democrats when these efforts are always bipartisan. Who among the Democrats has spoken up for Assange? And we can change that, and we should try to change that. But I'm just making the point that it's a different lift than the way in which we've been thinking.
Well, Congressman Ro Khanna was here tonight, and we want to congratulate him.
And Congresswoman Ilhan Omar did.
Ilhan Omar does.
And she
said we should look at the news.
She sent her regrets.
You know,
but your broader point is well taken, that, you know, in terms of the elected politicians,
it should be all of them supporting him, and it's like
standing up
for
for
them.
Basic
and I appreciate
rights in the country.
I appreciate that you said we need to start thinking in revolutionary terms. Even the good stuff that's happening is too little, too slow, too late. And JFK said that those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. We better have a peaceful revolution in this country, or God help us. Yeah. And what we see, whether it has to do with big oil, whether it has to do with big pharma, whether it has to do with the military, whether it has to do with government secrecy in any area, what we recognize is it's all a matrix. It's all this corporate matrix. It's this corporate political matrix, and it must be overthrown. And what must be overthrown is the complacency and the disengagement on our own part that keeps us from calling this craziness out. And we don't have a lot of time left. Yeah. All of us need. You might not think of yourself as an activist. The fact you're watching us tonight makes you an activist, and I hope that you will continue along this road. We have to talk. We have to do the things that Kyle was saying. You need to write your congressman, call your congressman, get involved in the midterms. This is not a moment when any of us can afford to be silent.
Margaret, thank you so much, Margaret, for making time. I know you're busy this evening.
Yes,
we're really grateful to have you.
Check out Black Agenda Report, everyone.
Yeah, everybody check out Black Agenda
Report. Bar. Thank you so much. And the site that I mentioned, actually the site is AssangeDefense.org. So that's what everyone should check out, AssangeDefense.org. Make sure you sign up for their updates. AssangeDefense.org.
Yeah.
And I go ahead, Kyle.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, I just wanted to reiterate the point because Gabriel stressed this to us, that the thing he... Oh, is it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Read in your mind. Gabriel stressed, listen, mobilize. It matters if you write your congresspeople. So write, call, get in contact with your congresspeople. I swear to you guys, it makes a difference. They're only human. They see a flood of stuff on a certain issue. Literally, Khanna, I should have brought this up when he was on the show, but the reason he got interested in new media is because he used to go on CNN and MSNBC and Fox News and Fox Business, and he's like, I get like one tweet over it.
Yeah.
He goes on any of the new media shows, and he was like, I'd get like 300 tweets.
Yeah.
And he responded to that. He was like, oh, okay, this is interesting.
Yeah.
If these people get calls and letters, they'll start acting.
I think I asked, someone tweeted, like, Katie, you started this. I'm being self-deprecating kind of, but I did ask Roe about Assange. And maybe that's why he's had to start thinking about it.
There you go. Well, another thing I wanted to share, well, first of all, having lived in both of those worlds, I can tell you the cable news world, the audience is very passive. In new media world, people are actively showing up for whatever the show is. They're affirmatively choosing, I want to hear from Marion, I want to hear from Kyle, I want to hear from Katie. And there's just way more, way higher level of engagement. So that's why new media can be so disproportionately impactful.
Headquarters of the revolution.
There you go. But I also wanted to share with you in their interview that we did with Stephen earlier that's going to drop tomorrow, he really, really wanted to stress that all of the little individual actions that people took, the letters he received in prison, I mean, he was very emotional.
It kept him going. He said it literally kept me going when I would wake up and get all these letters from people saying how much they appreciate what I did.
And not only him, he said all the people around him
Everybody else
in the prison.
Yeah.
They were uplifted by receiving those letters. And ultimately, you know, he was able to be released from prison into home confinement. But he felt like all of the pressure and the sunlight and scrutiny and all of those things, he really does believe, we're kind of kidding about like our live stream doing it. It wasn't just the live stream, but he really did feel like the public pressure and accountability forced the Bureau of Prisons to take another look at this case and decide to do something. So all of that is a long way of saying that it may feel so impotent to call your congressperson or send them a letter or send them an email.
But it's not.
Gabriel Shipton is not a stupid person.
No,
he's been at this for a while now. He's thought about what could make the biggest impact. And these are human beings. They respond if they get these communications. It impacts what is on their brain, what they think about, and what they're likely to bring up. So please, please, please call, write, do what you can, because it may feel small, but it really does make a huge, huge difference.
Yeah. And remember, when you talk to your Congress people, it's not just stop the extradition, it's stop the prosecution. Joe Biden could end this any day.
Yeah.
And also a plug for, you know, a lot of people have talked about the horrible torture, the psychological and emotional as well as physical torture on a certain level of people like Assange and so many other people in prison. One of the things that Stephen Donziger has said is that when he would get all this mail, that there were men who would say to him, "You get more mail in a day than I've gotten in a decade." There are a lot of projects out there. Remember, we have 2.3 million people imprisoned in the United States. When I was in college, we had 300,000. Hundreds of thousands of people who are imprisoned in the United States should not be, and possibly more. There are projects that you can Google and become part of some of these letter writing campaigns and write to people who, for whom it could make all the difference in the world.
What Stephen said is he would get the letters, so many at once, he'd get 30 letters in a day or whatever. The guards noticed he was getting the letters and were like, what's going on with this guy? So the guards Googled him, learned about his case, realized this guy stood up to Chevron, and like he's if anything, he's a hero. And so that sort of made the guards recognize who he was, made the inmates recognize who he was, and like he was saying, it sort of lifted everybody's mood and allowed everybody to feel like, you know, they're part of something, and it helped them get by knowing that there were people who cared and that, you know, it was something that was important. Yeah. So point is, a little spark can go a long way. A really long way, and just those letters were a little spark. So just get involved wherever you can.
So many prisoners of conscience in this country and around the world. That's why projects like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, et cetera, there's so much that all of us can do to make a difference. If you make a difference in the life of one person who is unjustly accused or unjustly imprisoned, you're going to change the world.
And speaking of Amnesty International, we should also mention that all the supporters of Julian Assange include the ACLU, PEN, Amnesty International, Reporters Without Borders, Free Press, the Reporters Committee, Human Rights Watch. So we really need to remember that people, when you support Julian Assange and his cause in Free Press, you are on the side of all these organizations that people respect.
It's a no-brainer. It's all about the Constitution, all about the First Amendment, all about free speech, all about a free press, all about upholding those values, not being a hypocrite on it. We love you guys. We're going to end here with something special. We're going to go out with an interview of both the great Cornel West, who needs no introduction, and the great Daniel Ellsberg, who, according to his own account, is the previous era's Julian Assange.
And when Joe Scarborough said, this isn't the Pentagon Papers, well, according to Daniel
Ellsberg's like, yeah, it is.
And I also want to update people that you'll see in the interview, because I spoke to Cornel, and my interview with Cornel, it looks a little different because I did it from my live show. Actually, I did it earlier this week. I did it with Stephen Donziger, Lucy Lawless, and Cornel West. It was a really fun discussion. So that clip is live. The other one is pre-taped because he had an operation Wednesday, but he's doing well.
Great.
So
Shout out to Daniel. We love you.
Recovering, And once again, to see the rest of the interview with Cornel West and also with Daniel Ellsberg, you can go to youtube.com/The Katie Halper Show. I'll be releasing those there.
That's right.
Listen, guys, last time we did this live stream, very next day, Stephen Donziger was back home. Let's see what happens this time, guys. Let's see what happens this time.
Next up, Daniel Hale.
Free Assange.
Thank you.
Next up, Daniel Hale. He let us know about the drones killing 90% innocent civilians.
Free Assange, free Mumia Abu-Jamal, free Leonard Peltier, free all political prisoners.
Daniel Hale.
And let's listen to what Daniel Ellsberg and Dr. Cornel West have to say. Good night, guys.
I wanted to know why Julian Assange is important to you, why his story, why his fate, why his treatment is important to you, and something that you've championed yourself.
I think anybody who has a commitment to truth, and the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak, ought to be not just committed to Brother Julian, but the principles that he stands for. What we are witnessing is the criminalizing of basic journalistic practices. We are witnessing the prosecuting of a journalist who has simply exposed lies and told truths about crimes of the American empire. And an empire, it believes it can say and do anything without accountability. So you get Biden on the one hand sitting up there at the summit of democracy, and Brother Clinton on the other, Secretary of State, talking about we believe in free press. Quit lying. You don't believe in free press. You believe in free press relative to your interests, relative to your power. Just be honest about it. You can be hypocritical, don't be gangster. I mean, the least thing you could do is be candid in that regard. And the sad thing really is, where's the New York Times? Where's the Washington Post? Where's the LA Times? Where is the journalistic establishment that claims to have commitments to freedom of press, claims to be libertarian? Because I believe libertarian sensibilities are very real for everybody, not just my friends. If this were a New York Times reporter, the world would be coming to an end. But no, they can use an old relic like the Espionage Act. And we're talking about the Obama administration. We're talking about the black face of the American empire with all those smiles and poise and so forth, smashing truth-telling. We want to be honest about this. Then we get a gangster Trump. He does the same thing. Now we get Biden. He does the same thing. Oh, we see this is structural and institutional, not just personal. No matter who's head of the empire, they don't want truths to be revealed. And there's a direct connection between lies and crimes, mendacity and criminality. And all we say is allow the truth to be put forward and allow the truth tellers to be free. That's all. And this is true across the board. It actually cuts across ideology. I mean, if they were doing this to right-wing folk who would expose the truth, they ought to be free too.
Right.
You know what I mean? If Tucker Carlson disclosed the crimes of the American empire and killing innocent people with drones, I'm going to support that brother, even though I'm agreeing with him about 2% of the time. It's a matter of principle here. But unfortunately, most substantive journalism in America is dead. Thank God for Katie Halpern's show, Amy Goodman's show. I mean, we got a few of them, you know what I mean?
So grateful to have Daniel Ellsberg speaking to us. And I just wanted to know why the Julian Assange story case, his fate, is so important to you.
I'm a friend of Julian Assange, so it's important to me because he is facing death in prison right now. My cause for the last 50 years or so forth has been protecting freedom of the press and truth-telling by whistleblowers. And if Julian's case were brought to the U.S. and led to a conviction and the Supreme Court affirms that conviction, the First Amendment would essentially be dead with respect to so-called national security or national defense issues involving classified information. It isn't dead yet. The case against Julian would nail it shut if it led to a conviction affirmed by the Supreme Court, which has never addressed the constitutional aspects of this issue. His indictment is unconstitutional. He has committed no crime, and yet he is, in fact, facing death. Why do I say that? We've just learned in the last few days that on the first day of the hearing, which led to the British agreeing to the U.S. appeal to extradite him by British judges, on the first day of that, he was suffering a stroke during the proceedings. It was clear to people watching that at the time, journalists who had access to it, of which I was not one, and that has been confirmed now by medical doctors, emphasizing the health issues which were the subject of this particular appeal. By the way, there will be an appeal of this decision by his defense team, which will raise the constitutional issues for the first time, but we'll get to that in a moment. That isn't very promising in Britain. But when I say it's an emergency right now, from the point of view of Julian and his friends and his family, I have just retweeted or tweeted out a column by Chris Hedges today. And let me be clear, I'm talking to you on Tuesday before your program. I have an operation scheduled for tomorrow, so I can't do it on Thursday. Chris is always very eloquent and passionate on these subjects, but I've never seen a better column on the both personal and First Amendment issues that are raised by this case. I've never seen anything quite like it, by the way, making so clear the murderous aspects of this proceeding. We're talking about a case here that should never have been brought constitutionally, though the British cannot be expected to understand that thoroughly. There's no question. The British don't have a constitutional First Amendment as we do. Protection of the press. That particular institution singled out for protection in our Constitution because with all its shortcomings of the press and its failures and its errors and everything else, it serves a essential public interest, which is now very much being challenged in a way that a lot of other administrations would have liked to do, but they didn't dare because it seemed so clear that the Supreme Court would find the charges unconstitutional, a blatant violation of the protection of the freedom of the press in the First Amendment, in our Bill of Rights. Other cases, like my own, mine was the first 50 years ago to, as a prosecution of an American for giving truth to Americans, truth that had been withheld from them, I would say, clearly wrongly, but in any case, truth-telling to the American public and media and Congress. As a source, I had been a former official. I had official access to this information, which was being wrongly withheld. There were many leaks before me, before that, but it had never been a case brought against to prosecute someone criminalizing this truth-telling or leaking. My case was the first indictment under the same charges that Julian is now facing. Alleged violation of the Espionage Act of 1917, which was, of course, designed and used until my case exclusively against spying, secretly delivering information to a foreign, in particular, enemy during times of war, but in any case, information that had been withheld by the government, giving it secretly to another government. There have been many spy cases used of the Espionage Act, but never what they acknowledged was a non-espionage case. It had never been used against someone for giving information to Americans. Why did they do that? Because they had no other law in this country in which to indict me. And they wanted as much to shut me up as they have wanted to shut up Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning, Ed Snowden, Tom Drake, and others. So they found this law, and the letter of the law does seem to apply. Badly drafted, or in some way, goes far more broadly than could be justified in terms of the First Amendment. But other administrations had refrained for that reason, for using it or any other law against sources or against whistleblowers, because it was so clearly unconstitutional to do that. Nixon experimented to see whether he could get a court, maybe the Supreme Court, to accept that it could be used in that way. And even if he had failed, the very 2 years of court process that I went through and would have an intimidating effect on future sources and journalists. Now, my case was dropped when evidence came out just before it went to the jury of criminal action by the Nixon administration against me outside the court case to shut me up. Not coincidentally, not just an interesting biped, this administration, I should say the Trump administration rather, which brought this indictment, did the same criminal acts against Julian Assange that led to the dismissal of charges against me. That included warrantless wiretapping, surveillance, in his case, surveillance of, because they had access to him at the Ecuadorian embassy secretly and illegally, surveillance of his discussions with his lawyers. I don't think that arose in my case particularly. Well, why not? They had illegal surveillance of me, illegal surveillance of his discussions with his doctors. It occurs to me as I say this, that had its exact counterpart. Of course, the so-called plumbers acting for the White House under Nixon went into my former psychoanalyst's office, doctor's office, in pursuit of information. There, not to blackmail me, but to threaten me with release and shut me up as a result. But in Julian's case, information on his ability to hold out there in terms of his medical discussions, He was under, throughout the 7 years, most of that time, in extreme pain from shoulder ligament injuries, harm, and also from dental problems that could not be dealt with in the Ecuadorian embassy. And the British government refused all requests to allow him to get the MRIs and the dental investigation that he needed without arresting him and essentially shipping him to the U.S. So he was in pain during that whole time, as I saw when I visited him twice in the Ecuadorian embassy. The first time, he looked all right. It was a long discussion. The second time, he looked terrible, and that was long before he was finally kidnapped and brought out of the embassy. And that, of course, has continued to be true in this high security, maximum security prison, Belmarsh, in which he's been held. Again, there is no excuse for his being in a high security prison like that, in essential solitary confinement, except that in the eyes of now President Biden, when he was vice president, that what he had done in telling these truths was it made him a high-tech terrorist. Now that's ridiculous. Truth-telling, giving out information, whatever you thought of it, terrorism, absurd.
Thanks for letting the women say what Gabe.
What's that?